Yuletide Visitations, December 21st, 2020. This is from Jim Kunstler, author of the blog Clusterfuck Nation. What a great title for a vlog. Jim writes, "Welcome to the longest night of the year, the moment of maximum mystification and terror for frail humanity, fretting that the sun might be going away for all the rest of time. Scanning the smoke signals from America's loudest engine of mystification, the New York Times, one searches in vain for some evidence that Joe Biden still exists. There is barely a cookie crumb trail of some hypothetical cabinet appointments, plus a few obviously insincere and artificial sugar plums about healing the nation. Where, oh where, is the party's avatar and the country's savior, old White Joe, in these fraught hours? Has the fabled basement become his tomb? Will his revenant float transparently out into the night sky on Christmas Eve and pass through the walls of the residence at 16 Pennsylvania Avenue to rattle his chains like Jacob Marley's ghost at the foot of the president's bed, wailing, 'I cannot rest, I cannot stay, I cannot linger anywhere. My spirit never walked beyond the awful shackles of the CEFC Energy Company. Mark me! In my life, my spirit never roved beyond the narrow limits of our family's money-changing hole, and weary journeys lie before me. Oh!" So I had to look up CEFC. It is a big Chinese energy company. Continuing, Jim writes, "It says something, does it not, that the corporeal Joe Biden is missing in action? You'd think he'd be bustling around like crazy out there, trying to at least give the impression of being at large and in charge, preparing to launch a score of battles against the enemies of peace and prosperity lately afflicting this sore-beset nation, yo-yoing back and forth between Jake Tapper and Rachel Maddow to reassure their cringing viewers of wokedom come, wolfing down plates of field peas, ham hocks, and cornbread to display his allyship with the downtrodden masses of this and that color, gender, flavor, and texture, comforting the homeless on the pitiless streets of the ailing cities, volunteering to get stuck with vaccine needles of every pharma company on the S&P, with side orders of hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, and famotidine." Never heard of that one. Not sure that's how it's pronounced, and famotidine, huddling with the nabobs of Wall Street to halt the sinking dollar, visiting the troops with plane loads of turkey dinners, rallying the worried people of this anxious land in their time of trouble. And what of Kamala Harris? Did she steal off to some Caribbean beach to mull over her options? It appears that she's still holding that seat in the U.S. Senate. Let's face it, a very cushy sinecure that fixes its exalted members for life, and in more ways than one, if you know what I mean. Of all the thoughts racing through Miss Harris's skull these dark days, I suspect the dimmest of them concerns the actual possibility she may actually end up as president. She acts like someone who knows something, and knows that the something she knows is not altogether a good something. Notice the giggling has ceased. And so we pass through a weekend of predictable news that Congress has authorized another gazillion dollars to bail out the stock markets and banks under the guise of helping ordinary Americans hopelessly crushed by lockdowns and government-induced small business failures, and we hurtle toward what's likely to be the bluest Christmas in memory, with the Republic in balance. The president, that would be Mr. Trump, is portrayed in the nervous mainstream news media as flailing wildly around the West Wing, confabbing with krakens, battling with his closest advisors, all opportuning him to concede the election. Do you think so? Maybe, but I'm not so sure. Something more orderly and momentous might be playing out. And, on the QT, something that may turn around the odious sham that was the election phase of the long-running coup against the chief executive. Joe Biden, or the ghost of Joe Biden, and the people who manage his hologram must not be allowed to occupy the Oval Office and seize the levers of power. It should be impossible to ignore the evidence of his previously bought and paid for obligations to the folks who run China, though the people who bring us the news do exactly that, and are probably acting as accessories to what will amount to one of the greatest attempted political crimes of history. It also appears that in the course of all these fractious election hijinks, foreign actors have penetrated America's most sensitive computer networks, including the Treasury Department, the nuke labs, and the electric grid. Why not then the computers that tabulated the recent election? They were, after all, hooked up to the internet, though they were not supposed to be. All this is right in the wheelhouse of the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the least you can say is that President Trump anticipated it when he shifted out the old DoD top management a month ago and replaced them with, shall we say, a more reliable crew. What remains to be seen this fateful Christmas week is exactly what and who will be flying over America's rooftops on the eve of the great day. A toast to all my readers and even the rowdy comment gang this hallowed week of our darkest days, and a Merry Christmas to all.
All right, thus begins, what is today? Tuesday's live stream. And a couple people watching, nobody chatting. That was pre-recorded. I hope it's obvious. So, what should I read for tomorrow? Place your suggestions in the chat, please. Alrighty, well, let us begin. Pop. So, the next comic strip I'm working on is basically Derek pulling himself into two smaller copies of himself. One is going to stay at the base and continue to be Derek, and the other is going to go with Pix to Los Angeles and adopt a new identity. Or maybe conjure or create a new identity. So, I don't really have the strip written yet. I just visually know what has to happen. At the very end, the Derek who's staying says to the Derek who's leaving, "Have fun storming the castle." Princess Bride reference, of course. All right. Somebody put something in the chat, give me something to talk about, or I'm just going to put some music on. Here, let's have a look at Jim Kunstler's this blog post here that I just read. The part that was interesting to me was the, whoever runs Joe Biden's hologram can't be granted access to the Oval Office. That seems to be a done deal. I'll be surprised if Joe doesn't take office. I mean, I won't be surprised if he's dead. I mean, if he's already dead, I wouldn't be surprised. But I think either Joe Biden or Kamala Harris will definitely be sworn in on the 20th of January. I will be very surprised if Donald Trump is sworn in. And at this point, while I really don't like Biden or Harris, I mean, that's an understatement to say I don't like Harris. What are people at the New York Times and Google and Amazon and Goldman Sachs going to do if Trump remains in office? I mean, they've been shitting themselves 24/7 for the last 4 years. I mean, their brains have long since hit the floor, but they could do something panicky, rash. Hey, you know what? There's one other piece I'm going to read to you before I start drawing. Let's see. Here, I'll put it back on the big screen. Don't actually have it up yet, but I think I know where to find it. Let's see. Health.com. Vaccination passport. All right, here we are. So remember yesterday, Vice magazine was careful to say that the idea that people will be pressured to get the vaccination is absolute paranoid conspiracy theory, and if you even mention that notion, you are a kook. Well, here's health.com, a very, very mainstream normie website. What is a COVID-19 immunity passport, and who will get one? Here's what experts say. An immunity passport could prove a person has been vaccinated, and they might be given more freedom about gathering in public places and traveling. Here's the debate. So people who can document that they have taken the jab, as the Brits say, might be given more freedom about gathering in public spaces and traveling. Okay? So that whole First Amendment thing, We're not worried about that. It's provisional. Congress shall make no law prohibiting the the free exercise of religion, the right to assemble, the right to petition government for redress of grievances. Well, provided your health passport is up to schedule. Now that a COVID-19 vaccine looks set to start rolling out across the U.S. within weeks, discussion has turned to whether some type of vaccination or immunity passport might be required. The idea is that once the vaccine is widely available, the passport would be issued to people who have been vaccinated to let them move more freely. The trustworthy shall be allowed to roam anywhere under heaven, while the discredited can't take a single step. Both locally and globally, by allowing access to indoor restaurants, movie theaters, and international travel. So you don't have to get a shot. No, you don't have to get a shot. You don't plan on going to the movies or eating in a restaurant or getting on a plane, but you're free to not get the shot. At this stage, it's all still speculation. However, the International Air Transport Association, IATA, an airline trade association that represents 290 airlines worldwide, said on November 23rd that it was in the final stages of developing a digital vaccine passport for travelers. The IATA Travel Pass will let travelers share their vaccination status and COVID-19 test results with airlines and border authorities via a contactless passport app. In Australia, Qantas chief executive Alan Joyce told Network 9 television last month, quote, "We are looking at changing our terms and conditions to say for international travelers that we will ask people to have the vaccination before they get on the aircraft," close quote. Remember, crazy conspiracy theory to think that people might be pressured to get the vaccine. South Korea's largest airline, Korean Air, might do the same. Spokesperson Jill Chung said governments are likely to require vaccinations as a condition for lifting quarantine requirements for new arrivals. ABC News reported. However, Chung added that this wasn't a matter for airlines to independently decide, and that it was up to governments to determine when and how to reopen borders safely. A vaccine passport is nothing new. This is not any new imposition on your liberties. This is established. There is precedent. Some countries already require immunization certificates for diseases like polio and yellow fever to prevent global spread. And decades ago, international travelers carried international certificates of vaccination approved by the World Health Organization and sponsored by the U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare Public Health Services. Quote, "It worked well. Travelers carried the record with them and used it to enter countries that required proof of immunizations," former hospital CEO and healthcare advisor biomedical ethicist Michael Hunn tells Health. I should have thrown a close quote in there. Immunization passport benefits are pretty clear. Basically, a vaccine or immunization passport is the quickest and easiest way to prove you've been vaccinated. It will make it easier to understand who is vaccinated and who is not. Infectious disease expert Amish A. Adalja, MD, senior scholar at Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security in Maryland, tells Health, quote, "Those who are not vaccinated may have to undergo testing or a quarantine when they travel internationally, while those who were vaccinated may have a simpler entry mechanism," close quote. Hunn agrees, quote, "As states, countries, and governments come to grips with new and evolving viruses and diseases, having a safe, secure, accessible, and coordinated record of immunizations appears to make sense," he says. "The advantages are absolutely clear for the ongoing health and safety of individuals and countries. The verification of immunizations against diseases, including COVID-19, is critical," close quote. What about COVID-19 vaccination passport apps? There's a lot of talk about these apps, which would contain information relating to your COVID status, including test results and details of your vaccine if you've had one. It's not clear exactly how they'd work, but the idea seems to be that they'd act as a kind of health pass you could present at an airport or public place to gain access. Several are in development. Common Pass, which lets individuals demonstrate their COVID status, will be rolled out this month for passengers on flights from New York, Boston, London, and Hong Kong. JetBlue Lufthansa, Swiss International Airlines, United Airlines, and Virgin Atlantic, I almost said Virgin Galactic, Virgin Atlantic are among the airlines taking part. In October, the app was successfully trialed on Cathay Pacific Airways, and United Airlines flights between Hong Kong, Singapore, London, and New York. The International Chamber of Commerce is developing AOK Pass, which the ICC describes as, quote, a scalable solution that enables governments and border authorities to reopen cross-border travel safely and efficiently, close quote. But more data is needed. For many people, it's simply too early to be talking about a vaccine passport or app. We don't even know yet if immunization stops someone from being contagious, which is to say, you might get the inoculation and still not be allowed to travel. So far, the vaccine trials show that the shots are very effective at preventing illness, but more research is needed to establish whether they also prevent someone from spreading the virus. Quote, it's unclear if the first-generation vaccines provide sterilizing immunity, Dr. Adalja says. What is clear is that they prevent symptomatic disease. There are plans to conduct studies to determine whether these vaccines prevent asymptomatic infection and contagiousness, but the results will likely not be known for some time, close quote. He points out that the data from the Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine trials suggest that it can prevent asymptomatic infection and therefore contagiousness in some recipients. This is one of several other vaccines seeking approval by regulatory authorities around the world. Passport or not, immunization records are crucial. A record of immunization has other benefits besides foreign travel. Quote, it will help to ensure accuracy of dates for any future booster vaccinations or ability to notify vaccine recipients of any discovered negative effects over decades, close quote, Hun says. The federal government has said it will issue a vaccine card for this purpose. Quote, we've set up everything in a draconian process where when we sent out the ancillary kits, which have needles and syringes, we've included paper cards to be filled out and, ellipse, given to the individuals, reminding them of their next vaccine due date. Army General Gustav Perna, Warp Speed's chief operating officer, said at a briefing on December 2nd, as reported by NPR. And in the UK, where the vaccine rollout has already started, the National Health Service, NHS, will provide a COVID-19 ID card to every UK resident who has the vaccine. The information on the card will include the type of vaccine, batch number, date it was administered, and a message to remind the patient of the date of their crucial follow-up dose. This information will be registered on an NHS database. However, these paper documents aren't the same as a passport to be used for international travel or to gain entry to bars and restaurants. This conversation is likely to continue over the next few months, with every country making its own recommendations and plans. The information in this story is accurate as of press time. However, as the situation surrounding COVID-19 continues to evolve, it's possible that some data have changed since publication. While Health is trying to keep our stories as up-to-date as possible, we also encourage readers to stay informed on news and recommendations for their own communities by using the CDC, World Health Organization, and their local public health department as resources. Don't you feel safe? Want to become famous? Oh my goodness, yes, please. Please. No doubt there is some balance to be struck between public health and contagion containment and freedom of travel. Will there be pressure to vaccinate? Yeah, would guess it would have to be incentivized. A lot of folks I went to school with are convinced it's a Bill Gates scheme to chip them like a pet and stamp them with the mark of the beast. How quaint that they think that that requires an implanted chip. Alrighty. Anything else you'd like me to read, or should I get on with the drawing? You won't hear that question for several more seconds, by which time I will have decided to go ahead and start drawing. So let's just skip to that. All right. So what if we start a new drawing and just do something that's roughly comic book page shaped. And let's import a template. What do you think, Drayland Fish? Do you plan to get the vaccine? Here's what we'll do. We'll bring in this. And we'll bring it up to, oh, not that big. Oh. Come on. Oh my goodness. All right, you know what? I have too many programs open. Let's see, let's close Premiere. Nope, don't save nothing. And let's close Photoshop. All right, now let's see if this is working any better. Yeah, still not so great. All right. All right, we just got to close this whole program. Nope, that's not what I want at all. Here's the real 8-panel template. Since I've got some immunological wackiness, I'd like to see how folks in my boat are faring with it before rolling the dice. Caring for older folks, I do have some incentive. This is supposedly the real 8-panel template. Oh, my filing system is so inadequate. All right. How about templates? There we go. All right. Let's see. And we'll put music on until somebody asks me a question or gives me something to respond to. Here's the... I've been using this piece with all of my Instagram videos recently. And speaking of Instagram, let's pop over to it. How can I find the stuff that I've saved? Maybe I can't with the desktop version. Well, Dryland Fish, let me encourage you to plan to check in just for a few minutes every day. I'm either going to read something at the beginning or I'm going to have something pre-recorded to play at the beginning. But there will be some more podcasty C-Realm type content up front with every live stream now. All right. So, yes, very limited daylight burning away. I don't know what your latitude is, but here it's 2:30. I've got less than 2 hours of light left. sunset today is supposed to be at 4:19 p.m. All right, here we go. Back to the music. What did I just do? Let's try that again. All right. Whoa, what the heck? Better. All right. Let's see. Okay, you know what? Before I really get into the drawing, you can tell I'm really stalling on the drawing. Let's see. Let's see if there are any questions from video viewers that I have not answered yet. No, I'm going to wait on that. Comments. Oh, that's way old. Oh, but I haven't responded. Okay, I see. Let's see. So I did a video where I was talking about how I'm very tempted to buy one of the new Google phones, the Google Pixel 4a or the Google Pixel 5. And Susan writes, KMO, don't get trapped in the continual tech upgrade rat race trap. It appears that they finally found the perfect consumer product that begets near instant obsolescence. We've decided to stick with our flip phones here. LOL. So, my phone, I mean, that's just a weird thing to call it because I almost never, ever make phone calls. Sometimes my mother calls me, but I almost never make outgoing phone calls. Or if I do, it's to like a bank or a big company, for customer service type stuff. Most of the, pleasure communication that I do is on WhatsApp, which is, it's on my phone, but a flip phone doesn't run that. Also, what I'm really looking forward to with the Google Pixel phone is the camera and the camera capabilities, which, are largely software enabled. The Google is making its own chip with Samsung for the next generation of its Pixel phones, but it already has a custom-made chip for the camera AI. So that's what I'm really interested in. And my current phone is a Huawei Mate SE. It's 2 years old, or I've had it for 2 years this month, and I paid $220 for it. For 24 months, I pay less than $10 a month for that phone. So, and I've said I'm not going to upgrade or, replace it until I've posted another 100 videos with it, shot and posted another 100 videos. So by the time I actually achieve that, my price per month for the phone's probably going to be down around $5 or less. So it's not like I'm buying a new $1,500, Samsung or Apple flagship phone every year. I couldn't possibly. It's simply not in the budget. But that's, basically what I said to Susan was that, the flip phone, I mean, that's great if you want it to make phone calls, but I don't make phone calls. I need WhatsApp. I need a camera. I need a video editor in the camera. Other apps that I run, the Huawei Health app, I keep track of my weight, things like that. What else do I use the phone for? Navigation when I'm out in the world. If I rent a car and I drive south, I've got the phone paired with the stereo in the car, the rental car, and that's my navigation. I used to have a separate device for that. I used to have it wasn't a Garmin. What was the other one? TomTom. I used to have a TomTom device, stuck to the windshield, and that's all, been wrapped up into the phone now. Well, let's see. Anyway, Susan says, makes sense in your case. We're retired, so can be voluntary Luddites. Yeah, I don't know that Luddites are even cool with flip phones, but who knows? Luddite is perhaps a moving target. So, and in that same video, I read some feedback from James S, I think, who suggested that I do yet another podcast. The Vault Within a Vault, the super top secret podcast, and Paul chimed in to say James is a goddamn genius, and I said he might be. But any idea that starts with create even more content than you do now is a non-starter for me. I'm already failing to keep pace with my current content creation schedule. Paul says, yeah, it's always fun to assign someone else to do work to do. And reminds me of the Irish expression, let's you and him fight. All right. What else? Nurkus says, I wish we had snow here in the middle of Sweden. I miss it. It's actually 38 degrees, or it was when I went outside. That's like 3 degrees Celsius. Alexa, what's the current temperature?
Right now, it's 37 degrees Fahrenheit. Tonight, expect a low of 18 degrees.
So I stepped out there just in my shirt jacket. Felt like paradise. Alexa, never mind. Alrighty. What's this? And I think I've discussed this in a video before. I haven't had many new comments recently because I haven't been posting much content. In fact, any. any content. All right, let's get the music going again. How about we skip to a totally different page, like this one. And how about road trip zzz?
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
No lyrics, please. How about Koto-san? Let's see. Alrighty. Okay, come on. There we go. All right, folks. Let's see. What's something I can listen to that's got some content that won't get me in trouble? How about the most recent Consular cast? Let's see. Chatting with Andres Duany about redesigning America in time of COVID and other social traumas. Now, Andres Duanis is he's from the Congress. I think he's the big head honcho at the Congress for the New Urbanism. So he's not a conspiracy dude. He's probably not going to have any non-traditional political views, I'm guessing. Whoops. Oh, okay. This is an essay by Jim. You can read that another time. Yeah, let's go with this podcast. All right, let's see who else has been a recent guest. I'm probably in a mood for something a bit juicier than Andres Duanis is going to provide. David Collum about the election fracas and other choice topics du jour. Or Doug Casey about the end of civilization and other modern problems. Doug Casey is an American writer, financier, and the founder and chairman of Casey Research. He describes himself as an anarcho-capitalist, influenced by the works of novelist Ayn Rand. Shudder. Casey is known as a real estate investor as well as an advisor on how to profit from... what? Market distortions and periods of economic turmoil. I could be allergic to that one, but let's give it a shot.
My guest today is Doug Casey, author, financier, international gadfly. His books include Crisis Investing, Totally Incorrect, Conversations with Doug Casey, and his new novel, Assassin, the third in his High Ground series of books. He currently lives in a small town in Uruguay, but I caught up with him on a brief stopover in Aspen, Colorado.
Oh, interesting.
Doug Casey, it's a pleasure to get you on my podcast, and I must say, you don't really turn up on a whole lot of other podcasts of other people, so it's rather a privilege to have you on. Are you averse to doing podcasts, or
No,
or what?
I do them, but they're mostly investment-type things, primarily directed towards the mining industry,
Yeah.
which is, how I've made my living, basically, for many years, playing with mining stocks. Perhaps I'm over-specialized.
Okay, well, we'll skip over that, and I'll just say I'm glad to have you here. You've been keeping your distance from the USA for a number of years. Does it present an unappetizing spectacle to you as a cultivated person?
The way I see it is that Western civilization itself peaked just before World War I. And while technology has kept improving and the standard of living has continued going up, the basics of civilization itself have been deteriorating for about 100 years right now, especially here in the United States. I think we're actually at the edge of a civil war. I've said that for a couple of years, and when I started saying that, people thought I was wacky. And I felt uncomfortable saying that myself.
I think you're wacky.
These so-called blue counties and red counties, the people in them really seem to hate each other. They can't talk to each other.
Yeah.
It's amazing, and it's everywhere across the country. It's really toxic. It's really serious.
I try not to, but I hate them both.
Yeah, I think we're in for really, really rough times, and not just November 3rd. I'm talking for the next 10 years.
Yeah, actually, that was almost exactly my next question, which is that we seem to be steaming straight into a period of considerable social, economic, and political disorder. Do you view this as the end of some, or the result of some natural process, or something that we've blundered into by making bad choices?
Maybe there are a couple of things at work here. One is one of the very few laws I believe in, and I don't believe in many, I promise, and that's the second law of thermodynamics, which basically holds that everything falls apart after a time. Everything winds down. And unfortunately, that may be true at this point of Western civilization itself, which, as far as I'm concerned, is the only civilization in the world's history that amounts to a hill of beans. We can talk about that, too. That's a controversial statement, I know, in these days of diversity and multiculturalism and so forth. So that's one reason.
Okay.
If you do too well for too long, you get fat and lazy. And I think that's happened to Europe and to the U.S. too. So that's one thing. Another thing, which is related to it, is that certainly for the last 2 or even 3 generations, where everybody goes to school, in fact, almost everybody goes to college now, even if it's just podunk college, podunk junior college or community college. The teachers in college, and therefore teachers in high school who go through that system, and even grade school teachers now have been inculcated with the values of socialism and Marxism and collectivism and statism. And when kids sit there and listen to this stuff for 8 hours a day, they absorb it, and they assume that, well, that's the way it is because I've got an authority figure, a teacher, who's telling me the way things are. And then it comes out and the way they vote and so forth. And of course, I don't believe in voting. I've been an anarcho-capitalist for most of my life at this point. I think that there's no way of turning this thing around. I think we've passed the point of no return. It's much like if you and I were Romans in the year 250. We might look around and say, yeah, I don't know how we can go back to the days of the Republic. And you can't, because you've got the barbarians on the outside and a cultural collapse from within. So there's a certain inevitability to the fall of the U.S. And incidentally, I think Biden's going to win this election. What do you think?
I don't, especially based on the events of the last week. The guy has proven himself to be little more than a common criminal.
Yeah, that's true. But
he's not a common criminal.
And I've got to add, everybody's been trying to label Donald Trump as a common criminal for the last 4 years. And, they brought all the resources of the Justice Department to that task, and they failed to do it. So, one has to conclude that there's really not a whole lot there as far as his activities being in some way illicit.
No, I agree with you on that, Jim. I absolutely do. But it seems to me that unless your ears are glued to Fox and very few other sources like that, you won't hear anything bad about Biden and what he's been doing and how much money he and his family have stolen. So people won't know that he's a criminal.
Well, that's true, and I think that he will spend probably the next 2 weeks doing everything possible to not answer a single question about it from a reporter. There will be one person who will be asking him questions about it, and that'll be Mr. Trump in the next and last debate. So we'll see how that works out. And I want to move on to some financial things and then get back to politics.
Hindsight is 2020.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's talk about financialization. I kind of view that as a grand turn away from producing things of value to asset stripping the value out of stuff that's already there, sort of self-cannibalizing our society. How would you define it, and what have you observed about the process?
I think you're absolutely right to start with. The country is greatly over-financialized. Even if you look at the value of different categories of stocks, you find that financial-related stocks, things like banks, insurance companies, brokerage firms, things of that nature, are I don't know, probably about 20% of the market. Way overemphasized. I mean, we don't produce anything anymore in this country except stuff off the farm and a few cars and that. It's all shuffling paper at this point, so that's a bad thing. The root of all this is the creation of funny money. Money should just be a medium of exchange and a store of value. That's all it should be. But now money's been turned into a political football where, they actually think, well, and they're partially right, they can manipulate what people do and how they act, how they work, how they consume, everything, by printing money up in New York and Washington. And one of the problems with this is that it's the rich guys that get all that money first. So the rich have, in fact, been getting richer. Since all these major corporations have been gravely mismanaged and politicized, everything's been politicized as well, now the government's bailing them out.
Yeah.
Which, once again, the rich guys are getting richer. The rich guys are shareholders. The rich guys are the managers and so forth. And the little guy at the bottom who's grubbing for roots and berries, making stuff on the production line, he's getting squeezed. So we're actually looking at the potential of a social revolution in the U.S. in addition to the Greater Depression, which is what I call it. My first book was a book called The International Man, a guidebook to making the most of your personal freedom and financial opportunity around the world. That book came out in 1978, I think, and it subsequently became the largest selling book in the history of Rhodesia. That is one that's never going to be broken, incidentally. Then my next book was a book called Crisis Investing that came out in 79.
Just hold it a second, Doug. Let's remind listeners that Rhodesia is what is now called Zimbabwe.
Yeah, I think a lot of people might not know that because that was a shockingly long period of time ago. That was 40 years ago now.
Yeah. Anyway, go on. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Okay. So then Crisis Investing came out in 79, basically predicting very, very rough times in many ways. And it became the number one best-selling book of 1980 of any type. I think it was number one on the New York Times list when that meant something. It doesn't mean anything anymore to be number one on the New York Times for a lot of reasons.
Folks, I got to step away from the drawing board.
I wrote a stock market book in 82 called Strategic Investing. It said buy stocks. My timing was good, actually. But it hit the New York Times list, but never made number one because it was at the bottom. And nobody wants to buy stocks at the bottom. So... And now I'm writing novels because as the world has started to come apart at the seams, I find that there are a lot of things, and you understand this, there are a lot of things that you can say in the form of fiction that you perhaps best not or even dare not say in the form of nonfiction. So that's where I am now. My most recent one, I got to put a plug in. You'll excuse me.
No,
Jim.
I was just about to ask you about your next novel, your forthcoming novel, Assassin, which I've been reading. I've been admiring quite a bit. It's actually an excellent job of composing fiction just from the technical standpoint. It's really an admirable job. Go on, tell us a little bit from your end.
Well, it's the third in a series, which is a series of 7 that's projected, where our hero, Charles Knight, starts out in the first novel, Speculator, which is a bit of an education in gold and gold mining. He's a kid. He's 23 years old. Gets lucky on a mining stock. He has no money, but he makes $1 million on it. It's possible to do incidentally with these highly volatile, crappy little mining stocks. And he says, I better go to Africa and check this out. And he does. And he gets involved in a bush war, and it turns out to be a mining fraud. But he plays that to his advantage, makes a lot of money. Has to kill a couple people, I'm afraid. Makes a couple $100 billion. The government steals it from him. But he still puts quite a bit aside. Okay, goes off for 7 years, kind of like a Christ figure, I guess. And comes back and becomes a drug lord. And here's where, I'm trying to reform the besmirched occupation of speculator. Then he becomes a drug lord, and I try to show in that book, second book, that a drug lord can be a good guy because he gets involved in both DEA and FDA regulated drugs, including he develops a fantastic drug which doesn't cloud your mind, it clears your mind. And once again, he gets in a jackpot with the government, has all his money stolen, and is put in jail for 2 years. And that's when we start an assassin. We talk about his 2 years doing hard time in prison.
You've drawn a really interesting portrait of how a person can redeem their situation under such terrible conditions and actually cultivate their mind and body.
Yes, he makes the most of it. He's a well-disciplined guy. And he's pissed off now. And he becomes an assassin in the model of Edmond Dantes, of Count of Monte Cristo, or Paladin.
Yeah.
But you remember Have Gun Will Travel, which I think was the best half-hour show that was ever on television.
Yeah, I remember it.
Yeah. So he's a problem solver. But there are some people that just need killing, and most of them are government officials or their cronies. And it's a morality tale where we discuss whether it is morally proper to kill people preemptively.
That's exactly what I want to...
That should be the quote of the day. Some people just need killing.
ask you in this particular question was that you place a lot of value on the ethical development of each individual. And we seem to have eliminated ethical development from American culture almost entirely. And as a result, we're becoming a nation of savages.
Yeah, I'd say you're right. I think you're quite correct. Nobody thinks about ethics or gets any education in it because when you, in high school and college, they don't talk about Plato's Socratic dialogues where they're talking about what's right and wrong and good and evil. They don't talk about Aristotle, or they don't talk about the Stoics or the Epicureans or any of these things. They talk about gender studies and things that have no value whatsoever. You don't even look at Shakespeare, who considers these things. And I hate to go off on a tangent when I should be talking about Assassin. But the next book is Terrorist, which is, they figure out that he's probably in back of these political assassinations. And we talk about the practicality of them. Do they really change anything when you take out the top man? That's a question.
Yep.
So,
good question.
He's accused of being a terrorist, which is a real hot potato, which brings him back to Africa, where he becomes a warlord, where I talk about my hobby. I don't think I've told you that my hobby for the last 20 years has been going to third world countries, preferably military dictatorships. And I always manage to sit down with the guy on top and try to give him a plan where he can turn his shithole country into Singapore on steroids in 10 years.
That's an admirable task, I'd say.
It is. And it's given me lots of really fun adventures with strange people in bizarre countries. Most Americans can't even find on the map. So that's the next one. And then it gets really radical after that. So,
all right, look, I'm going to tear you away from that. I did want to reiterate that I'm very impressed with just the quality of the writing. But we're going to turn to some financial issues now.
Yeah.
All right. The Federal Reserve, okay, which has generated many, many trillions of dollars in just the past year, on top of what I guess started out as a $23 trillion national debt we'd previously accumulated. How does that not show up as destroying the value of the dollar, which is, one way of viewing inflation?
Well, it does. And if you look at the number of dollars in existence, it's a hyperbolic curve. If you look at that hyperbolic curve, you find that we passed the knee of the curve where it's accelerating, but then it passes the knee and it starts going vertical. And that started about 10 years ago. And now it really is vertical, where if the Federal Reserve doesn't continue printing up dollars, and they do this by buying the federal government's debt, they buy the government's debt and then credit the U.S. government at commercial banks, big commercial banks, with the Federal Reserve notes that they create in exchange for the debt. So that's the mechanical process by which it works. They have no choice but to keep financing it because there's no domestic savings in this country anymore. So the average guy isn't buying T-bills and T-bonds anymore. In fact, money managers don't want to buy them because they're getting like close to 0% interest, and bonds are what you might call return-free risk.
Yeah.
Triple threat to your capital. You got the interest rate risk. Interest rates will go back up to the levels of the early 1980s, 12, 15, 20% and higher. That'll happen. So that'll destroy the value of your bonds because bond values float inversely with interest rates. Then you got the currency risk because they're destroying the dollar by creating all these dollars. That's your second risk. And your third risk is default risk. Those bonds may not be repaid at all. So bonds are a triple threat to your capital. Listen, we're looking at a nightmare. We're looking actually at the long-awaited collapse of Western civilization. This is going to be exciting to watch, but very unpleasant and quite inconvenient.
Yeah. The first of our two sponsors today is Sage Restoration, a fine company based out of Ontario, Canada. They'd like to reach all you listeners out there living in the long emergency who are ready to start building a world made by hand. This company specializes in high-quality traditional varnishes, paints, and other products for building preservation. Peeling paint and rotten wood are modern problems brought on by modern plastic materials, but our building history tells us it doesn't have to be that way. Craftsmen from the past used natural oils and resins to paint and protect wood from the inside out rather than the plastic coatings of today that trap moisture and leave us with a rotten, peeling mess. As specialists in traditional wood preservation, Sage Restoration offers a whole new generation of linseed oil finishes for preserving wood and metal that lasts for decades, that do not trap moisture, that do not peel, and that are easy to maintain. At Sage Restoration, it's our mission to restore our connection to traditional materials and knowledge that have been proven over time and work to return the built environment to one that is worth caring about. For more information, visit the website at sagerestoration.com. That's sagerestoration, one word, .com. And listeners to the Kunstlercast get free shipping on their first order. Use the code KUNSTLER at checkout. You can also look for the Sage Restoration sponsorship in the Eyesore of the Month feature on the Kunstler.com website. We thought it would be a nice relief and a helpful alternative to the architectural horrors that we present every month. Richard Duncan is one character out there on the economic scene. He likes to call the current financial system creditism, which seems to state that credit itself becomes money. But, credit is a two-way street. You need lenders and borrowers, and if the borrowers don't pay the interest or the principal back to the lenders, then you don't really have credit. You just have, a pantomime of credit.
You're quite correct. And this is why the government has painted itself into a corner, because interest rates now are at all-time lows. But if they raise them, those creditors that you refer to will find themselves unable to pay it back. And then the house of cards collapses. So right now we're at the edge. You're going to have to keep creating trillions. And it's going to be evidence, not just all that money's flowing right now into the financial markets.
Right.
So with bubbles being created. But it's going to start filtering down into the retail area as well.
Well, you've been out of the country for a while, and I can tell you that just going to the supermarket, you can see the prices of things now beginning to make a significant move.
That's true.
It's almost impossible to go into the supermarket and find a single item for less than $4. Whether it's a can of peanut butter or an onion. It's.
I don't know how the average American is making it, quite frankly.
I wonder about that too. One of the kind of adjuncts of creditism is this idea of modern monetary theory, or maybe vice versa. Maybe creditism is the stepchild of that. The idea that the government can create as much money as they want to all the time and to keep the current arrangements floating. Why not just send every citizen $1 million check and just close up the whole operation and just call it a day and have a nation of millionaires?
Well, why not indeed? And actually, you may recall when George McGovern was running for president.
I do. My first election.
Yeah, exactly. One of his plans was to credit every American with $1,000. You remember that part of it?
I actually don't.
Well, that was one of his...
Maybe I was too stoned back then. I don't know.
Well, he thought that was a good idea at the time. Just send everybody $1,000, and that would stimulate the economy. The usual argument. And of course, now $1,000 is that's like some walking around money for a week.
Yeah, that's like one car repair.
Yeah, that's exactly.
What are you talking about?
Exactly
Nancy
right.
Pelosi said that $600 is significant for working families.
So-called.
Sorry, I'm talking over them. Nancy Pelosi just said that $600, Nancy Pelosi, who has over $100 million, just said that $600 over 6 months is significant. It's a significant amount of money for working families. So how can he say that $1,000 is just walking around money? That's just cynical. Okay.
Which basically is just printing money and giving it to people wholesale. That's what it amounts to. And if Mr. Biden is elected, which I think he will be, that's what they're going to go to. Listen, this is going to be financial chaos and economic chaos, and then it's going to be social chaos. And at the same time, we're looking at the potential for something resembling World War III outside. In other words, not just little sport wars like we've been having for the last 20 years. I'm talking about a serious war. Although it won't resemble World War II. It'll be different. So now this is scary stuff. Listen, we're talking about being outside the country, and for many years I've been to 160 countries. Many times I've lived in 10 countries, and right now I'm talking to you from the People's Republic of Aspen, Colorado.
Right. You just touched down there a short while ago, and you're not going to be there long.
No, that's correct. I'm going to get back to Uruguay as soon as I can. Actually, I've got some business up here. I've said for years, you really have to have, if you can possibly afford it, a crib outside the U.S. because I think we're at the cusp of something that's as serious as the French Revolution in 1789. And I point out that if I'd been in France in 1789, I would have said, wonderful to get rid of Louis XVI. I would have supported that. But not a good idea, the way they did it, because then they got Robespierre, followed by Napoleon. And another good example is Russia in 1917. They got rid of Nicholas II. Great, all for it. But then it got much worse with Lenin and then Stalin. And the same thing could happen in this country. This could be the third great cultural, and of course Mao Tse-tung's cultural revolution too. That upset a lot of things.
Just the things that were going on in Mao's cultural revolution almost exactly resemble the kind of tactics that the wokesters are doing today. This shaming and humiliating and canceling and ruining people's livelihoods and reputations. And I maintain that a lot of what's going on today with wokesterism, which is sort of the new international socialism, is really based on nothing more than the wish to coerce other people and push them around, and that it has a rather sadistic edge to it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This stuff about walking up to people in restaurants and making them stand and salute Black Lives Matter and shaming them for what you might have heard them saying. And there's so many things like that. Look, that actually happened to me in Las Vegas 2 years ago. I was having dinner with some pretty well-known people, like George Gilder, who wrote the book that Ronald Reagan promoted,
sure.
John Mackey, who founded Whole Foods, and a few other people.
Were you at a conference?
Yeah, I was. I was at Freedom Fest, which occurs in July in Vegas. Have you ever been there?
I wrote a chapter about Vegas in one of my books on urbanism, and I was there for a week. Yeah.
Okay, but you'll have to come to this Freedom Fest next year, because it's kind of like, there's a couple thousand people, but it's like Old Home Week for people that like to think and write and talk and like that. It was a spin-off. Mark Skousen started that. Have you ever had him on your show?
No, I haven't.
No,
I've heard Peter Schiff talk about Freedom Fest on his podcast.
Yeah, exactly. So actually, Skousen started it. It was a continuation of something I started back in 1980 called the Eris Society, after the Greek goddess of, not chaos, of discord. Mm-hmm. And when I had started the Eris Society, we'd have like 150 people, invitation only. And we'd sit around here in Aspen for 3 days, and everybody would talk about what they were famous for. And we had people, everybody from Stuart Brand of the Whole Earth Catalog to Sonny Barger, president of the Hells Angels, to all kinds of people. If I knew you back then, you certainly would have been there. But anyway, it turned into Freedom Fest, which is, much, much bigger and not by invitation only.
So you were sitting around with a bunch of these cats.
Oh, yeah, I was sitting around with these guys.
Whoa,
frankly,
huge.
I was pretty much 3 sheets to the wind. We were just drinking a lot of wine. And I'm sitting there next to George Gilder, and somebody isn't back of me. I'm not paying any attention. And one of the guys at the table, the guy that publishes Skeptical Inquirer magazine,
Michael
you know what I'm talking about?
I don't know the guy. No, I don't.
Anyway, that's the magazine he publishes. And he stands up and he's making supplicating gestures with this.
I think that's Michael Shermer, but I'm going to double check. Michael Shermer. Let's see. Michael Brandt Shermer is an American science writer, historian of science, founder of the Skeptic Society, and editor-in-chief of its magazine Skeptic, which is largely devoted to investigating pseudoscientific and supernatural claims. The Skeptics... Okay, so is that the same publication that he's talking about? I don't know. Anyway. Back to it.
His hands to somebody in back of me someplace, and I didn't pay any attention. I just said, what the hell's the matter with this guy making supplicating gestures like? But so when me and Gilder walk out of the right, this is a very, very expensive restaurant at the Venetian in Vegas. Yeah. A guy about 60 confronts George and I, and blah 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 blah, and we look at it and something about what we were talking about, which was very politically incorrect, the table. So we're looking at each other and looking at him. We thought we were dealing with a maniac, and unfortunately, we were both kind of drunk. So we just let it pass. Yeah. And if I hadn't been drinking, and if I'd realized what was going on, this is 2 years ago. I mean, it might have been an ugly confrontation, but we just thought we were dealing with another drunk lunatic. Yeah, this stuff is serious that's happening. It is like China's Great Cultural Revolution, where people are shamed and all kinds of terrible things happen, and it could get out of control in the U.S. I think it will. Yeah,
we're going to get to that a little bit more, and to veer towards that, I want to ask you about this. We're close to the deadline for ending the COVID-19 forbearances on mortgage payments and rents. Okay, let's remember that all these people who have not been paying their mortgages and have not been paying their rents, those failures to pay thunder through the system too. Those are landlords who can't pay the banks on the notes that they owe. It breaks the chain of credit and debt and money. And so what happens then when that comes to an end? Either a lot of people are going to be thrown out of the places they live, or they'll renew the thing and that chain will remain broken, and the money will not be moving up the chain.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And it's especially serious in a society which is deeply in debt as the U.S. The average guy he's got his car payment or lease payment. I mean, people can't afford to buy cars anymore. You remember when, in the old days, if you wanted a car, you saved up and you bought one.
Yeah.
And then you got 2-year financing, 3-year, 4-year, 5. Now it's up to 7-year financing. In fact,
for a used car.
With that, so they have to lease a car.
Yeah.
So cars have turned from a small asset to an immediate large liability. Yeah, so you got that. You got credit card debt. You got all kinds of debt. If you own a house, all the local governments are now bankrupt, so you're going to see real estate taxes going up, sales taxes going up too. Mm-hmm. So there's no way out of this. There's no way out of it from a financial point of view. You're quite correct. I mean, you can forbear paying rent and mortgage and God knows what, but I understand you still have to pay it later. Is that the way this works?
Yeah.
It's additional debt. It's not like forgiven somehow, right?
Yeah. There are so many industries that appear to be failing now. Everything from the petroleum industry, where production's gone down over 2 million barrels a day since 2019, to Hollywood, which seems unable to produce movies or find a place to exhibit them anymore.
Yep.
And higher education. We've had just 4 colleges in my region have gone out of business in the last year. Just pretty spectacular.
I would say good. I don't know the colleges that you might be referring to, but I would say good riddance.
Well, yeah, I think there's an element of that, especially for higher ed. But personally, I see this as nature's way of telling us that we're going to have to seriously downscale our activities and reorganize them and relocalize a lot of our ways of doing business, if we do even continue to do any kind of business at all or to make things at all. What does this kind of universal business failure say to you?
It says to me that we're well into what I call the Greater Depression. And I call it the Greater Depression because it's going to be much more serious and much longer lasting and much different from what happened from 1929 to 1946. It's really this economic element that, these idiots that talk about a V-shaped recovery, not going to happen. This is, at best, it's going to be a K-shaped recovery where the rich keep getting richer because of all this money that's created by the government that flows to the rich people primarily and first, and the people on the bottom are going to be the other side of the K that goes down. I mean, look out. This is really serious stuff.
Well, yeah, 2 things about that. One is, do you see a particular inflection point that you've identified where our daily economic arrangements truly break? And can you speculate on what some of the candidates for that inflection point might be?
Yeah, that's a good question, of course. Everybody's attention is being directed by the cheerleaders to the stock market, which keeps hitting new highs. It's in a bubble. And the bond market is in a hyper bubble. So when the stock market and the bond markets collapse, and they will at some point, that's going to scare people. That could be the start of it right there. Mm-hmm. And you pointed out quite correctly that the forbearance on a lot of payments, that could be a start right there too. The thing is, this whole COVID hysteria, and COVID is not the problem at all. I mean, it's in terms of the number of people that it kills, it's a bad annual seasonal flu, seriously. And we don't know what the numbers are anyway, because all kinds of things are being reported as COVID deaths. COVID just was there, but not important. Since the real estate collapse that started in 2008, I said, well, we've entered the Greater Depression. Look at it as a hurricane, where we've entered the leading edge of the storm. And then through 2008, 9, and 10, we were in the turbulent leading edge. And then we've been in the eye of the hurricane. Giant hurricane, big eye. And the government poured oil on it in the form of trillions of dollars. But now we're going through the trailing edge. And it's going to be a doozy. And it's just started, really.
And now a word from our second sponsor, David McElvaney's ICM Wealth Management. You heard what Doug Casey just
World's
said.
crashing,
Wild
we're
times
dying,
coming
we're all
our
gonna
way.
die. Hey, everybody,
Nothing
some
moves
investments.
precious metals like uncertainty and political disorder. And it seems like it's just down the road now. Gold and silver have been consolidating in the meantime, refusing to be smashed. We should regard that as a buying opportunity for the move over $2,000. There are two proven and effective strategies for compounding ounces in your precious metals portfolio without putting more money in. But there's only one company you'll find that has been advising clients in these strategies and doing so for over 30 years. McElvaney ICA advises you on and manages your precious metals holdings and will not let you get started in dead-end products. Instead, your personal advisor will make sure your portfolio is set up for free ounce accumulation strategies as the markets change and keep you informed on when to make a move. This can also be easily done within your IRA. Call 1-800-525-9556 for a free report to learn more, or go to icagoldcompany.com to download the PDF. By the way, I'm also a big fan of David McElvaney's podcast, the McElvaney Weekly Commentary, which is truly among the best on the web and gives you a great snapshot of David's generous personality. And now back to the podcast. Oh, the public civil disorder has been, that's been a new feature of the scene for the last 6 months or so. You know, I see these videos of the violence and mayhem and rioting in places like Portland and Seattle. And the ordinary citizens have been putting up with it for 125 nights in Portland. You wonder how long it'll be before they realize that these people are actually wrecking their city. You know, you get a sense that because of the figures they elect to high office, that the citizens actually support this kind of mayhem themselves. But sooner or later, you know, that kind of insane bargain's got to come to an end.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Now, I've been fortunate because, you know, I've got a couple of cribs outside the U.S., so that as the U.S. devolves towards something horrible like France in 1789 or Russia in 1917 or China in 1966, I can watch it on my widescreen from a safe location as opposed to out my front window. But here in the U.S., I'm in Aspen, Colorado, which is a very odd place.
Sure. It's abnormal.
Yeah, it's an abnormal place. You've got the billionaires that are pushing the multimillionaires down valley. Meanwhile, in a town with a population of 7,300 people, 2,300 so-called employee housing units, which is basically subsidized housing, which you can qualify for if you're well connected. If you make up to $150,000 a year, you can get subsidized housing here in Aspen. It's crazy.
Wow.
And it's the People's Republic because, you know, all these people, they're all ultra leftists. They vote all the county commissars and city councilmen and the mayor, they're actually all doctrinaire communists, believe it or not. I mean, there aren't many communists left in Russia. There's more communists here in Aspen.
Well, that's more of a fashion statement in Aspen, I think, than an actual political belief.
Yeah, you're right, because what can they do? They can, you know, enforce kind of annoying rules about distancing and wearing masks and this type of thing, and they can have local taxes. But you're right. It is a fashion statement.
Well, this leads me to ask you something. You have traveled so widely and into so many strange places. Have you ever sojourned in a place that was rather disordered or in the middle of a civil war or a failed state kind of activity?
Well, incidentally, that is the best time to go to any place.
Really?
But I mean, because you got to look at the State Department's travel warnings. Those are the best times to go places. Like when I went to Israel one time, it was during the Second Intifada, which was the safest time to be there. Because, I mean, there were no tourists at all. I could visit everything, and I was about the only person there. The hotels were empty. It was wonderful.
Yeah, but they were blowing up cafes and buses and stuff.
Not when I was there, because the Israelis were so on top of this that, there was actually no danger at all. I mean, those guys are pretty tough and pretty competent. So we felt great staying there for a week during that Intifada. And other places, it's the same thing. So it's just like so many things in the world. It's just the opposite of what people think.
Hey, listen, in the last 10 minutes here, I want to ask you a few questions about the American political scene, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
As far as you understand, and I think you know quite a bit about it, and you've consorted with a lot of people who know stuff. Is there a deep state, and can you describe what it actually consists of, and what you think might motivate it?
Yeah, there really is a deep state. It's not just some kind of a loony right-wing fantasy. I've lived in Washington, D.C., actually, a good part of my life, starting from when I made the mistake of misallocating 4 years of my time and a bunch of money going to Georgetown University. And then idiotically, I stayed in Washington for 20 years after I graduated. Yes, there really is this deep state. And what is the deep state? It's top congressmen, top senators, not all of them, top ones, a bunch of generals, the heads of the Praetorian agencies, CIA, DEA, FBI, et cetera, et cetera. It's top corporate guys. It's guys that run NGOs. It's top academics. Those are the people that are the deep state.
Yeah, the bankers, we left those out.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, no question. Yes. It's people like that. They're all deep staters. And it's not a conspiracy. I mean, a lot of them know each other. They went to the same schools. They belong to the same country clubs. They have the same philosophical outlook on society. So it's informal. But they know who each other are. The one hand washes the other. I don't think there's a guy stroking a white cat running it. I mean,
yeah, but I must say, and I want to ask you, the deep state, as we describe it, understand it, has had sinister overtones for a long time, but it seems to have taken a rather psychopathic turn in recent years.
Yeah, it really has. I think it's factual that the deep state elements have been trying to overthrow Trump, and if Trump is elected, by a wide enough margin that they can't deny that he was elected. Although I think it's the group that cheats the best that's going to win this election. This idea of democracy in America, I mean, that's a fraud and a chimera. We don't have democracy in this country. Not that democracy, incidentally, is necessarily a good thing. That's a whole different conversation we could have. But yeah. I call it mob rule, dressed up in a coat and tie.
Yeah.
But the deep state, yeah, these guys exist. It's real, and they hate Trump because not that he has any kind of philosophical beliefs or anything. He's an opportunist as far as I'm concerned, but he's kind of a cultural conservative. Let me put it that way, where he really wants to see the U.S. go back to the days of Ozzie and Harriet and Father Knows Best and happy days, that kind of thing. And also, he's kind of an obstreperous guy. So since they showed that they hate him, now he hates them. So if he's reelected, I think he's going to do some interesting stuff, breaking their rice bowls. But I don't think he's going to be reelected. I think these guys are going to get Kamala Harris in there, who's a Looney Tunes. This woman.
Yeah.
Then it's we're off to the races.
Yeah, that is a plausible and rather grim picture you're drawing there. I'm curious, what does Doug Casey imagine daily life in the USA will look like in 10 years on the ground?
Well, I think we're going to go through a decade of troubles where the Greater Depression is finally going to be acknowledged as really, really a big deal, much worse than what happened during the 1930s and 40s. Followed up with something that resembles World War III, but very different from World War II. That's a whole subject we could talk about sometime. It's going to be chaotic, and I think the U.S. is going to be the epicenter of it, followed by Europe, which is a collapsing society also. It's so hard to predict a genuinely chaotic situation, which I think we're looking at. So I think living in a place like where you do, which is, you're not close to a big city. And
yeah, I'm 200 miles away from New York, Boston, and Montreal.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. So you can get to them if you want to, but it's too far for them to get to you. And, people are still used to producing things and making things and, kind of salt of the earth type. Now, here in Aspen, this is a totally different kind of situation, but we're not going to have BLM and Antifa running through the streets of Aspen either.
You don't think?
I don't think so.
You don't think they're going to be able to afford to stay in a local motel there and riot every night?
No, and these billionaires really have kind of a short fuse when it comes to being inconvenienced by, window breakers and stuff like that. So it's funny, but we're both in kind of small, isolated towns. That's kind of the key. Yeah. That's kind of the key. Here in Aspen right now, the real estate agents are coining money because all these obnoxious rich people from the big cities are buying anything, putting a bid in on anything that looks like it's for sale. And I'm going to sell the ranch outside of town because I don't like the sociological flavor of Aspen anymore. It used to be, when I first came here, that in the 70s, that this was the land of soft snow, hard drugs, and casual sex. Forget about it. Nothing like that anymore. So why am I staying here? I'm not. I'm going to go someplace else.
Yeah, it's like a town of 7,500 Ian Fleming villains. All living in one place, desperately.
And I find that I don't like them and they don't like me. So I'm staying here. I'm like a dinosaur that, I should get going to some place that suits me better. I don't know where that is yet, frankly.
Well, as you know, there are a lot of places in the world, and some of them are nicer than other places, and they're out there. And, if you don't like one, you're in a position to move to another, and that's a fortunate thing.
Well, I've got a 1,000-acre spread in Uruguay, not far from the ocean, on a river, close to a resort town. Very pleasant being there. But I'd still like to have something in the U.S. because I love what used to be America. Of course, no longer really America. It's mutated into the United States, which is just another 200 nation states that are covering the face of the globe like a skin disease.
Well, it is a kind of a disturbing spectacle every day to, get up to the newspapers and the websites and see what's going on in this country. But from my point of view, at least it does provide a lot of interesting material, raw material for commentary. At this point, I don't really have the mojo to get up and move to another country, and probably won't, so I'll be sticking it out where I am.
I might.
I'd really like to connect with you another time in the months ahead as we parse the results of the election and the action that follows on the ground after that.
Yeah, I think there's about 100 separate subjects we could talk about, Jim, and they'd all be kind of interesting.
Hey, you said that you were going to be making a rather long drive to our nation's capital soon.
Yeah, I'm going to get in the car.
I imagine you're going to see some very interesting things along the way.
Yeah, and I'm inclined to stay off of the interstates and go on the back roads and through small towns.
Sure.
You know, go to diners and maybe strike up conversations with people, that kind of thing, as we drive 2,000 miles from Aspen to D.C.
Well, you put up bulletins on your own website, which is the International Man website. We'll put up the link to that in the show notes. You write occasional bulletins yourself, and you have a stable of writers who write them as well. You publish other people. I'm looking forward to hear your observations about, your journey to the heart of darkness in our nation's capital in the next month or so.
Well, we'd like to get you to contribute something to internationalman.com. If you'd like.
It'll cost you a lot, Doug. I'm a high-priced service here, but we can talk about it. Okay. And maybe on your birthday, I'll give you a freebie.
Okay, and I hope many of your listeners pick up a copy of Assassin.
Yeah, when's that coming out?
Because I believe you when you say. Because it is a good read, right?
Yes, it is a good read. I think it's very well constructed. It's got a lot of dramatic velocity, and it's a really intelligent, and I really appreciate that. When's it coming out? When are they going to be able to get it?
Well, it's on Amazon now.
Oh.
It just appeared on Amazon a couple of days ago, and the hardback will be out. So right now is the answer, and including Audible, that'll be a couple of weeks more. But,
so that's Assassin by Doug Casey. We'll be looking for that. We're going to touch base again, and we will ride again.
Okay. Yeah, this has been a lot of fun talking to you, Jim.
All right. I have an idea. File. Save. All right. Well, that was Jim talking to somebody, Casey. What was his name? Doug Casey. And his book is... Assassins. All right. Let's see. Yes, I'm looking to buy a humidifier. Mine quit working. Let's go. Books. Yeah, they still sell books. Let's see. Casey. Assassin. All right. Doug Casey and John Hunt, Assassin, High Ground. Oh, it's the third book in a series, huh? It looks like it's not on... Oh, the earlier ones are on Audible. Or at least the first one is. And the second one. All right. Let's see. I'd play the audio sample, but that might get me in copyright trouble. So, let's pop back to the book. Spectator, High Ground, Volume 1. Let's get a sample. Huh. So he's got a blurb from Ron Paul, who says, Speculator uses the cover of a thrilling tale of international intrigue to provide an economic and moral defense of the much maligned speculator and economic and moral condemnation of those who profit via force and fraud. Doug Casey and John Hunt have provided an invaluable service to those looking for unique ways to spread ideas of liberty. I wonder how they divide the writing duties. Who else? Lou Rockwell. Okay, so definitely got the libertarian crowd on board here. Wendy McElroy. A resolution almost unresolved, a cliffhanger in the jungle. Charles Knight stood tall at the edge of a precipice. Far below, the tumultuous Bangu River scoured its path along the ancient fault, while its roar echoed up the canyon walls it had carved over the eons. He gazed over hundreds of square miles of thick African bush. The decades-old geologic surveys conveyed none of the continent's colors, its fragrance, the weight of its air. To the north stood steep hills capped with erosion-resistant dark green basaltic rock, the congealed blood of extinct volcanoes. To the west, a ghostly band of gray clouds pregnant with rain floated at the horizon. When the rain arrived, it would come in torrents, the likes of which few people on the planet ever experienced. The ledge on which Charles now stood had suffered the assault of such rain for millennia. Little remained of the limestone glue that had, for all that time, maintained the integrity of the rock. The additional stress of his 180 pounds simply proved too great. With a sound no louder than a sigh, the once solid rock transformed into fluid under his feet. He felt it happen. He knew what it implied. Gravity, its will defied too long, would wait no more. He reached for anything solid and found nothing. Sadness at lost opportunities weighed upon him more than fear. His 23 years of life would end as an irregular stain on the jagged, brecciated? I don't know that word. The jagged, brecciated rock 200 feet below. A stain that would appear only after agonizing bounces off outcrops that would mangle his body on the way down. There was nothing Charles Knight could do but die, and the nearest person who would give a damn was 5,000 miles away. So what do you want in life, Charles? His Uncle Maurice asked him with the air of a wealthy man who knew the workings of the world. They were the first words that Uncle Maurice had ever said to him beyond a brusque grunt that served as an initial greeting. Charles had just turned 13, and it was both his first trip back east and the first time he had met his uncle, his mother's mysterious and reputedly dangerous brother. The boy sat in the great man's luxury apartment among a bewildering assortment of financial newspapers and corporate reports, surrounded by walls sheathed with books. He'd been assigned one of the spare bedrooms and given to understand he could stay until the end of summer, or until he wanted to go back to Montana, or until Uncle Maurice asked him to leave, whichever came first. Uncle Maurice was an intimidating man. He had a big head that Charles knew was filled with brains and packed with knowledge, and a formidable body that, though bursting with fat, was full of heart, or so his mother used to say. Charles shifted to sit upright on the couch, pushing aside some scattered debris from his uncle's unkempt lifestyle. After a moment's hesitation, he looked at his uncle and replied simply, although his voice cracked with a combination of tension and the hormonal changes of adolescence, "I want to live a good life." He hesitated again, then, eyes sparkling with more enthusiasm, "and an adventurous, maybe an exotic one." Uncle Maurice raised the eyebrows on his expansive forehead and pursed his lips between prodigious cheeks. His expression changed from one of brief surprise to one of interest, now studying his nephew with closer attention. He then followed his first question with a challenge. "Charles, I expect less from a boy your age. Charles, I expected less from a boy your age. I'm impressed. So I'm giving you an assignment. You will define for me and for yourself on paper and in detail exactly what you mean by a good life. Maurice paused for a moment and scratched his round chin. And tell me what you mean by exotic. These concepts aren't normally mentioned together, certainly not by someone your age. The one brings to mind a monastery, the other a Bangkok cat house. Because he was still in school, a situation that would not persist much longer, Charles was accustomed to teachers assigning mind-numbing fluff to no useful end other than to occupy his time. But his own uncle assigning him homework just wasn't fair. It was summer vacation. His mother died 3 weeks ago. He hadn't come to New York to write an essay for this man. He came here because his father, consumed in grief, thought the time apart would be good for both of them. When is it due? Charles asked, with just a touch of ill-concealed distaste. Based on his school assignments, he presumed a deadline for filling several pages with conventional thoughts in order to please a teacher who was herself just going through the motions. Exploring the city from the top of the Empire State Building to the tunnels of the subway system had a lot more appeal than writing a paper, as did visiting the Natural History Museum and studying the exhibits at his own pace without the distraction of other students, or climbing into the torch of Lady Liberty, whether or not it was legal. What adventure would he have to sacrifice to write a pointless essay? This assignment would, at the very least, cause him to defer reading The Count of Monte Cristo, which he had squeezed into his travel backpack that morning before he boarded the plane. But it turned out Uncle Maurice was nothing like those teachers. He was more like a co-conspirator. Charles, the great man said, you need to explore New York for now. First things first, your assignment isn't due tomorrow, nor next week. That was a relief. In fact, Uncle Maurice continued, it's not due until the day you've discovered the answers. It may take years, or decades, so you have plenty of time to think about it. I know you like books. I've got a good library here. I'll give you a few to help kick off the process. Obviously, I'm not going to sit here and read the whole book to you, but that's not bad. Not bad. All right. Put that away. All right. So, where are we? 3:49. Draw for 10 minutes, then take a little break. Anything in the chat? No. This is the deadest chat in a long time. All right, let's see. Well, I could listen to another Kunstler cast. I'd say anybody object, but I'm pretty sure I know the answer. So... well, let's talk about the election fracas.
Hello and welcome to the Kunstler Cast. Thanks for listening. And also please welcome back the favorite gadfly of podcasterdom, David Collum of Cornell University, fearless slayer of false equivalencies and other dodges of the politically malevolent. We're going to dissect the current election fracas and several other choice subjects du jour. And so, let's get right to it. A pleasure to talk to you again, Dave Collum, over in Ithaca, New York, home of Cornell University, where you teach on the chemistry faculty. These are pretty strange days, wouldn't you say, David?
This is pretty much the strangest year I could imagine. I think the superposition of events is causing a magnification of all of them.
Yes, and also a magnification, apparently, of a kind of psychotic reaction among the public.
Yeah, it's kind of spooky.
Well, we're going to get to some of the election issues later, but we're going to also range over a bunch of other things, including things that are related to and will spin off the election, but aren't directly about it. Dave, what's your particular view as a scientist of the whole long-range COVID-19 affair, from its beginning to where we are at now, and what it's been about?
Well, it's kind of come at us in phases. So when it first showed up, it was just a virus in China. Who cares? They have them all the time. The pigs got knocked out last year and by the droves. I was worried about them because the food supply issue. When they shut down Wuhan, I panicked. I said, holy cow, that's non-trivial. I thought they had a banking crisis, actually. I thought they were using a virus to cover up a domestic problem.
Yeah, I kind of thought that too.
And we watched it sort of come across the ocean on the death ships, the cruise ships, and the kind of metaphorically 1348 repeat. And then I think there were a lot of mistakes made early on that are forgivable, even ones that are horrific, like the biggest mistake was probably Cuomo's putting people in nursing homes. But, it was in the heat of battle, and so I can forgive that. And they say Trump screwed up. Of course, everyone says that.
Hey, did anybody do it better, necessarily, really?
Taiwan,
I don't think so,
South
actually,
Korea?
But, it's an election year, so that's not the talking point.
Right.
But let's say there was, hypothetically, a window where he should have been doing something, which I don't think is true. But at the critical moment, you'd have to say it was sort of January, I would think, right? January, early February. He was being impeached at the time.
Yeah.
So if you want to see blood on someone's hands, Adam Schiff, Pelosi, these guys, everyone says, I should have still been able to do it. I go, no. If you're being impeached, the top of your to-do list every morning is how not to get impeached.
Yeah. Do you think this COVID virus is going to be with us for a while going forward, or is it going to burn itself out? I was under the impression that viruses generally burn themselves out.
Well, they do. I think it's going to be endemic. I think it's going to be like the flu. I don't think it's going to go away. For all I know, it is the flu. Viruses burn themselves out in a variety of ways. One is herd immunity. There's these rumors that this one, you can get again. Well, you can get the flu again, too. I have a funny feeling those are not going to hold up over time. I think your immune system works well. There are rumors that their antibody titers were dropping, but they always drop, right? If you lived on the Ganges, you'd be 80% body weight antibodies if they didn't drop. I think there's a natural herd immunity. There's, T-cell arguments that says, half the population at least can't get it anyways because they're already immunologically robust. And so there's a second part of it. One is the virus can mutate into a mild form, and that can occur without even what I'll call population genetics. So one of the ideas is, the virus gets transferred only by people who survive, and so the deadly versions die. This one moves different than that. So they say, well, they're not dying before they're infecting, therefore. But back in the turn of the century, they serially injected rats with various viruses, and they found that it just attenuated without any selection pressure. It just got tamer with each subsequent infection. And I think that's happening. I think we've learned how not to kill people with ventilators. That's helped.
Yeah.
So I think it's running its course. I think we will be told that the vaccine is critical. I think we'll be told that the vaccine saved us. But I have this funny feeling that they're slamming the barn door pretty late.
Yep. All right, well, let's just move on from that. Do you harbor any suspicions that the recent election was less than altogether fair and square?
I harbor deep convictions. They never are, but I think this one was particularly problematic, yes. I think this, you never know, and I really want, if there's deep rot, I want it to surface. I'm not even 100% sure I want it to make a difference because I don't want to be around when the Democrats find out they lost.
Yeah.
But I do think it's deep-seated, and I do think that if we don't clean it up, we're going to be a banana republic very quickly. So I think it's not about who won this election. It's about finding this rot, and it's like, it's like a root canal. We got to do it.
Yeah, I'm really impressed with how far and wide and deep the rot has gone in the whole government. And it seems like there's an amazing institutional failure out there.
Yeah, and
nobody's doing their job.
Especially the media. I've been trying to find a way to articulate this, and I realize that the media and journalists are different, and the latter doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And so we've got a media that does no journalism. If you want to pull off some nefarious activity, you no longer have to do it cleanly and cleverly. You simply have to control the media.
Yeah, you know, it impressed me also when I was thinking about the collapse of the Soviet system 30 years ago. Well, that was around 1989-90. And that was before the internet became a really important presence in daily life. They had, of course, a lying media, the Pravda state media, but they got around it with mimeograph machines and the grapevine.
Right.
And we do have more than that now. We do have an alt media that's pretty sturdy out there. And yet we don't seem to be able to overcome the extraordinary bad faith and dishonesty of the regular old legacy media.
I still think most people are getting their news from various networks and turning on the TV at night and listening to someone talk about, the Biden laptop's a right-wing conspiracy and stuff like that. And even if it's not true, the media should be covering it as not true rather than just declaring it not true and refusing to talk about it. They should be making the case. I just finished a write-up on George Floyd's death. The average person probably has no idea that he died of a heart attack with high confidence. He'd eating is suffocated by Chauvin. And when that trial hits the news, that could get very ugly very fast if the jury listens to the data.
Okay.
Yeah.
It says, okay, they're innocent.
Stepping away from
I think they are. I actually think they're completely innocent.
Save. There we go.
Yeah, it was what we call bad optics, of course, but optics are not necessarily the facts of the matter.
Well, here's one for you. Your listeners, ask yourself, what was the most iconically worst image of the whole thing? What was the image that hit every media site? If you had to put a photo in the middle of your article, what was it? Well, it was the picture of Chauvin with his knee on his neck, looking nonchalant with his hand in his pocket. Is that not correct?
Yeah, looking for a pack of gum or something.
Yeah, well, it turns out that if you look carefully at that image, his hand's not in his pocket. Not at all. He's got a blue glove on that blends in with his pants. And it's trivial to see if you get close and look and you go, oh, his hand's not in his pocket. Now, that doesn't make him any less guilty or less innocent. But the entire media used that as a way to convict Chauvin in the court of popular opinion as being just a ruthlessly bad guy, and that hand in the pocket was just such bad optics. And I hope your listeners, while they're listening, boot up a Google image and look at that goddamn picture, and you'll see fingers outside the pocket. We're
going to get back to some BLM stuff later. I want to ask you, as somebody who traffics in numbers and statistics quite a bit as a chemistry prof, what did you make of the returns coming in on election night? Did they strike you at the time as being janky or what?
Well, so I went to bed about 1:30 that night. I think about the numbers a little bit differently, but the betting parlors had Trump a 75% probable winner at 1:30. And across the various battleground states, they were showing up as faint, robin's egg blue, meaning they were heading towards Trump but not there yet. And so I went to bed and I said to my wife, I think Trump's going to win this. And she was despondent. She was one of many who doesn't like him. And anyone who knows him can understand why the others don't like him. That's easy. It's a different question. And so I went to bed, and then I woke up, and there it was. All of a sudden, everything had flipped, and it was now 7-1 probable towards Biden. Mm-hmm. Now, the way I view that is that was a 21-fold change in momentum overnight. And you say, well, certain precincts came in. Well, the betting parlors know this. The betting parlors are wisdom of crowds. There are people looking at the various precincts and doing the math and saying, there's a lot of money being bet out there. So this is like right before the Super Bowl, going from a 3-1 favorite to a 7-1 underdog. Mm-hmm. And the betting parlors smell it out before the votes smell it out. And so I found that to be really surreal. And then you just see all of a sudden all this stuff starts surfacing, and there was that sort of 4 a.m. spike in the Biden counts in Wisconsin and Michigan, and you go, oh boy, that looked wrong. And I said, look, I think that's evidence of fraud. Friends would say, no, son. I said, okay, so as the story goes, there's some number of ballots in which you vote for just the president, you don't vote for anybody else, right? So you can imagine them being a few of them this time. They don't care about the rest of the election, but they got them out to vote, right? And it turns out in, I think it was Georgia, but it was one of the battleground states, where the slug of votes came in, where the down ballot omissions for Trump totaled 800 votes. There's 450,000 nationally, right? So it's 500,000 people voted for just the president and nothing else, right?
Yeah.
And Biden had 96,000 non-down ballot votes. And I go, 96,800. So you look at some other states and you find that they differ by a factor of 2 or 3, but all of a sudden that was a 100-to-1 ratio of people who voted just Biden, no one else on the ticket.
Yeah, weird a little bit.
Well, so I said, look, that's evidence of fraud. I'm sorry. And people say, no, it's not. And I go, what are you talking about? If I flipped a coin, the Fat Tony story, you flip a coin 100 times, it comes up heads. What's the odds? So you say it's a legitimate coin. What's the odds of it coming up heads the 101st time? And Fat Tony says 100%. And the person says to Fat Tony, no, it's 50%. And he says, no, it's not. It's 100. He says, why do you say that? And Tony says, well, the coin's rigged. And he said, but I told you it wasn't. He said, you lied. Fat Tony figured out the lie was the most probable event. And so I think that 96,800, someone's lying.
Well, if Mr. Trump is finally defeated in all of this, what does this tell us about the nature and disposition of his opponents and of the deep state?
Well, so if we presume the claim out there, so if you watch CNN, the claim is that they're finding a few outliers here and there, and some grandmother voted twice and stuff like that. No one cares, right? That's the way of saying, yes, we found some fraud, but it's nothing. The Trump team is claiming, and when we're going to get the evidence of this, I don't know. They're claiming that Trump won in a landslide and that there were millions of votes that were stolen.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And they got to come up with it, right? So the burden's on them. And a former head of the Federal Election Committee said, I believe there was wholesale fraud, former head. Mm-hmm. He also said if Sidney Powell, who he knows personally, if Sidney Powell says she has evidence of wholesale fraud, he says, I guarantee you she has evidence of wholesale fraud. He says she's that good.
Yeah, and I don't see her bargaining away her reputation.
No, that would be a stupid thing to do. And so so how it plays out from here, I don't know. And is there some sort of magical way they can just say, sorry, the bell rung, you lose, welcome President Biden? I don't know. I don't know the mechanics.
Well, I think for 3 weeks it's got to go through some kind of a litigation process. It's going to be in the courts.
One of Trump's lawyers said, look, this is a monumental task.
It's interesting to listen to this weeks later, because the court process has taken time, but yielded no benefit to Trump and his team.
She said this is not like an episode of Law and Order.
Yeah,
this is a big problem. And she says we're working around the clock.
Yeah,
and she says, but we're not going to fight this in the court of popular opinion, which at that moment she was. But she says this is going to play out in the courts.
Yeah, well, I think they felt they had to say something.
If they come up with here's 5,000 votes that were counted wrong, that's nothing. I don't care.
Yeah. And
they've been doing this for years. They've been doing this. Dead guys have been voting since there have been dead guys, right?
Sure.
That's been happening forever. And I view the electoral process like a gigantic game of capture the flag, and each team's trying to get each other's flag. And I think it's at the margins normally. I think this time, because of this deep-seated sense that we got to get Trump out of there by people of great power, right? All the guys, for example, who could be convicted of something if he gets elected.
Right.
I heard Durham gave up his investigation.
Well, that was just kind of an internet rumor. I don't think it's true. And other people have stated or declared pretty definitively it's not true, but we'll see.
So that's the media trying to control the narrative.
Right.
That's effectively the media saying, look, only insane people are supporting Trump at this point. That's their current opera. They announce him to be president-elect. They pretend like he's going to be it. They pretend like the debate's over. Reminds me of my opinion of climate change, I should add. And so it'll be fascinating to watch it play out. Can the Trump team pull off this heroic save? If it's presuming it's real, can they pull it off?
Yeah, I don't know. But the Biden choo-choo train seems to have 27 boxcars of wokesterism behind it. Do you have any insight into how people who call themselves liberals can end up in a faction that is against free speech, in favor of suppressing news, and in favor of carrying on inquisitions against others for thinking differently?
Well, I think...
Because you're in that liberal milieu of Cornell University, an Ivy League university.
Really? I hadn't noticed. I think some of it's the fact that we're hearing from a noisy small group, and others, you can see clear evidence that the super, what I'll call alt-left thinking, is being couched in ways that makes it impossible not to oppose it. Possible to oppose it. And so, do you really have the guts to say Black lives don't matter, right? Are you ever going to say that?
No, but I'm very willing to say that Black Lives Matter is a hustle, which is not the same thing. And, it actually kind of puts the ball in their court a little bit.
And it's hustles at various levels, but there's a great quote, I can't remember the author, who said, every movement becomes a business and ends up a racket.
Oh, yeah, that is a good one.
And so I think that's what's happened. Black Lives Matter, I read somewhere they have something like $1.7 billion they've raised.
Well, I think they've got a lot of money. I don't know if it's that much, but it's a lot.
Well, one of the claims is it goes straight to the DNC. That's the other claim.
Yeah.
Do you believe that? Is that true?
I believe that quite a bit of it went to the DNC, yeah.
That's a crime syndicate right there.
I've been asking some of my anti-Trump, pro-woke friends this question. I've been asking them, what exactly is the appeal of Joe Biden in terms of charm, charisma, and intelligence?
Yeah, the answer is he's not Trump.
I guess. That's it. It's as simple as that.
Well, the question, I heard someone pose on the Black Lives Matter movement and the organization itself, besides being a bunch of Marxists supposedly, but, maybe some people say, yeah, that's good. That's fine.
The first of our two sponsors today is Sage Restoration, a fine company based out of Ontario, Canada. They'd like to reach all you listeners out there living in the long emergency who are ready to start building a world made by hand. This company specializes in high-quality traditional varnishes, paints, and other products for building preservation. Peeling paint and rotten wood are modern problems brought on by modern plastic materials. But our building history tells us it doesn't have to be that way. Craftsmen from the past use natural oils and resins to paint and protect wood from the inside out rather than the plastic coatings of today that trap moisture and leave us with a rotten, peeling mess. As specialists in traditional wood preservation, Sage Restoration offers a whole new generation of linseed oil finishes for preserving wood and metal that lasts for decades, that do not trap moisture, that do not peel, and that are easy to maintain. At Sage Restoration, it's our mission to restore our connection to traditional materials and knowledge that have been proven over time and work to return the built environment to one that is worth caring about. For more information, visit the website at sagerestoration.com. That's sagerestoration, one word, .com. And listeners to the Kunstlercast get free shipping on their first order. Use the code KUNSTLER at checkout. You can also look for the Sage Restoration sponsorship in the Eyesore of the Month feature on the Kunstler.com website. We thought it would be a nice relief and a helpful alternative to the architectural horrors that we present every month. The Biden transition team seems like they have ginned up quite a pander party for all the intersectional characters of Victimland. The people of color, the transsexuals, the angry women, et cetera, et cetera. Are we going to have to live through another 4 years of this Jacobin revolution?
I don't know how this plays out. It's
I wonder if Jim
disturbing.
knows that there's
one
an
of the
actual
interesting
leftist
questions
magazine
to
called
ask is
Jacobin.
what possible good can come out of a system in which somehow being a victim is a win? I'm reading Dan Crenshaw, the congressman, the pirate, one-eyed Crenshaw, his book, and it's a phenomenal book, actually. And he kind of goes through this. He says, what has happened to society where being a victim is a winning strategy? And I don't understand. And a colleague once said to me, you are what you were.
To win is to
which
lose.
means that whatever you like, I grew up in the inflationary 70s, so I'm afraid of inflation, right? That just never quite leaves you. And are these victims going to just be victims for the rest of their lives? Is that the way they're going to play it? I sure hope not, because it's not a winning strategy. It's for losers, actually.
Yeah, except in the meantime, as a victim, you get a certain amount of brownie points and perhaps some other rewards. A good job where you don't have to do much of anything, and honors and Academy Awards and things like that.
Yeah, well, that group, by the way, is starting to get the memo. The entertainment industry, whether it's the NBA championship or WNBA or Academy Awards, their viewership has been plummeting, and they're pretending like it has something to do with other topics, but it comes down to the fact that most people want to escape by watching basketball and laughing and having a good time. They don't want to turn on their TV and have someone shoving political messages in their face that half of us don't agree with.
Yeah, especially men who generally enjoy rough conversation around sports.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. My wife is involved in a pleasure boat where they do ecological tours and they talk about Kego Lake and stuff, and she's on the board. A couple of the members of the board wanted to hang a BLM sign, and she said, we're not a political organization.
Yeah.
And I've written, again, I'm writing a lot lately, I've written a section on what I call group statements. And I oppose group statements. The minute you sign a group statement, you're forfeiting individuality, you're forfeiting freedom of thought, you're compromising on the wording. So would you have really written it exactly the way that group statement came out? Can you, if it's something that's polarizing, like if a bunch of scientists from a group decide they have to say something about climate change, do you really have the freedom to say I'm not signing? The answer is yes, but not without a cost. Mm-hmm. And so I don't like group statements at all, and I think they're disastrous. And in science, which it's happening a lot now, in science you're taking people who are supposed to be fiercely individual, where they're supposed to question everything, and now you're getting them to sign collective consensus type thinking. And there was a case where a guy wrote a very polarizing article saying that diversity hurts organic chemistry. Now, why would he write that article? I don't know why. You can make various arguments about why a better system is based on merit. You didn't have to write it down. You didn't have to say it. Mm-hmm. Everyone knows there's a sacrifice when you have affirmative action. It's a price that society try to figure out how to balance, right? But he wrote a pretty polarizing article, and all 17 of the American advisors on this German journal's advisory board all resigned and wrote a manifesto. The question I ask is, did they all agree? Did they all agree with the wording? Could any of them have said no? And the answer is no.
Yeah.
These are famous chemists, but they all worked as a unit. Chemical and Engineering News, the sort of the magazine of the American Chemical Society, put out a tweet supporting shut down STEM.
Well, the kind of things that you're describing are the kinds of things that have happened in history as medieval witch hunting inquisitions and other hysterias. This seems to be in a class with those kinds of ancient hysterias. What do you conclude about human nature from that possibility?
Well, I keep asking about the motive. So I think the better analogies than medieval witch hunting is just Russian Revolution in 1917, the brown shirts in Germany in the 1930s. Those are closer to home. Those were industrialized, educated societies that went very bad. And people, they thought the brown shirts were just a bunch of hooligans when they first started. And so people from the Eastern Bloc are watching what's happening in the United States, and they're very nervous.
What do you make of these Democratic governors and mayors who seem to be promoting the destruction of their own cities with the Antifa riots and the BLM riots?
Well, they're doing it in several ways. There's that, but then on top of it, there's the shutdowns that they seem to do so gleefully.
How does it happen in a city like Portland, for example? No, we're not in Portland, either of us. I realize that. But how does it happen that there is not some kind of a really strenuous reaction against Ted Wheeler for allowing his city to be burned down?
I don't know. The madness of crowds, right? I really don't know how human nature works at that level. I've read a lot of books on neuropsych and the kind of experiments and, prisoner guard experiments and stuff like that. But I would have to argue that Wheeler, who I think is the mayor of Portland, or is he Seattle? I can't remember which.
He's Portland.
Yeah, he must be a bit of an idiot. A coward would be another way of putting it. So I think the mayor's... Now, I think a mayor who's not a coward still has his hands full, or her hands full. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's easy. We've learned that if the mob decides they want to do something, the cops are not strong enough to stop them. That's a very scary reality.
Yeah. By the way, at Cornell U, did you have any struggle sessions going on there the last year or so with people being required to sit through white privilege struggle sessions and things like that?
Well, there's one I keep getting an email on. I'm supposed to take a 45-minute on sexual harassment. I haven't seen evidence of any bad ones. I've actually participated over the last 10 or 15 years in probably about 4 of them, where you talk about sort of implicit bias and things like that. And I would say the 4 I listened to were constructive. They were the kind of thing where you go, yeah, I hadn't thought about that, right? One of those things. I have not yet seen evidence of the kind where it's a complete moron talking about how white guys are bad and white privilege is bad and we should all just sit around and smack ourselves in the face with a mallet. I've not seen those yet. I have pretty good faith in our administration. I'm kind of hoping that's well-founded. Yeah. I know our provost is great. I'm sort of still out. The jury's out on the president. But she professes to support free speech, for example. Mm-hmm. And so
that's brave.
She professes to not want to be the one to try to adjudicate what speech should be made. And I've not seen evidence against it besides just a sort of lurking, some people who know her better than me, than I, maybe, whatever. They have some concerns of whether or not she'd change her tune faster than would make me comfortable.
Hey, while we're on the subject, it seems that higher ed itself as a whole, as an industry, let's say, is getting ready to kind of tank. It's been pushed over the edge by COVID-19, and they've lost a lot of revenue for housing and meal plans and all that, and it seems to be foundering also on the cracked foundations of 2 really bad problems that it brought on itself: the loan racketeering problem and the kind of intellectual racketeering problem of offering imaginary majors in idiotic fields. So you combine those 2, it's not doing the higher ed industry very good. And I have a feeling a lot of colleges are going to be going down. You have any insight about that?
Well, I would think so too. What I can't say I see evidence of it happening yet. I know of one college that got auctioned off, but it was a small college in Vermont that probably was on the edge of bankruptcy anyways. There's guys like Scott Galloway who predict, 2,000 insolvencies. Yeah. One could ask the question, is it possible because everyone went to colleges one time or another that there'll be a gigantic bailout of all the colleges at the expense of whoever happens to be.
Yeah, but bailout for what? For what if it's a bailout for an economy that under no circumstances can support that amount of higher ed for the amount of jobs that are not going to exist?
Yeah, I think at some point we've got to trim. We measure our progress in the country by number of degrees, and that's stupid. That's the equivalent of measuring our progress in Vietnam by the number of dead Vietnamese. And so what I think we could cut the number of college degrees in half and lose almost nothing.
Yeah.
There was a college that was on the edge of insolvency, and they cut away everything but 4 majors. They raised some money, and they're solvent again. They pulled out by getting their shit together. That could happen. I don't know. The majors that you're talking about, there's sort of 2 levels. One are the ones that are just stupid. I'm not going to mention them by name because I don't want to get an email from them. But we all know who they are. The ones where you go, that shouldn't be a major. I'm not sure it should be a course. But then there's the ones that have been around for years, like philosophy and stuff. And what in some sense they represent is a residue from a bygone era where only wealthy people went to college, and so wealthy people could afford to study, frivolous things.
Yeah.
I like philosophy, but college at this point, you had been.
So, a word about philosophy as an undergraduate major. Philosophy majors, at least this was true in the 90s. I don't know if it's still true. I don't see why it wouldn't be. Philosophy majors score higher on post-secondary standardized tests like the GMAT and the GRE than any other major. So, if you think it's frivolous, you probably don't have much experience with how philosophy courses beyond, the basic intro to ethics, intro to philosophy, intro to logic, that a lot of freshmen take. Beyond those, if you get into real philosophy courses, I think people who dismiss philosophy as airy-fairy or indistinct or frivolous, they've just never taken, a rigorous philosophy course.
Better generate a lot of wealth to pay off that loan. So, I don't think. I loved anthropology. I loved a lot of courses, but I don't think you can afford to spend $250,000 just to major in anthropology. There's no way to extinguish the loans.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of loans and speaking of the economy and economic matters, personally, I doubt that the Democratic Progressive administration would be able to run any of its social and economic experiments of, free college tuition and guaranteed basic income and Medicare for all, because they're about to be overwhelmed by what looks like a tremendous disorder in the banking system and in the bond markets especially.
Yeah.
What are your dark secret thoughts about that lately?
Well, again, I guess the metaphor on that was probably the eye of the hurricane. Everything seems so shockingly calm. And it's like we've crawled out of the basement and there's no wind at all and the clouds are around us, but they're looking kind of funny. And we go, well, it seems clear. And what we don't know is the other half of the hurricane's coming. Don't know when it's going to show up. Don't know what they can mitigate. They being guys willing to print money by the tens of trillions. Guy named Felix Zuloff, who I occasionally chat with digitally, thinks they're going to put out 40 or 50 trillion before this is over.
Huh.
And what that does to the system is just not calculable. So could be one of these things where you go, God, I thought the savings and loan crisis was going to destroy us, and we kind of mowed right over that with dumping hundreds of billions into the system at the time. And so they keep surprising me in their ability to get us further out on the gangplank without us jumping off the end.
Well, the U.S. 10-year benchmark bond has been creeping up to about the 100 basis point level. It's getting there. And I'm hearing estimates of a possible 30% loss in the value of the dollar in 2021. And that would necessarily drive up interest rates and drive down bond values. Could it wreck the bond market?
I think at some point the bond market has to go. I mean, the bond market's a complex thing. It's no longer just bonds.
Yeah.
It's
a lot of derivatives.
There's a shadow banking system where there's leverage of a kind that I'm not qualified to understand. I'm only qualified to smell. I can sense its existence there. But I think the entire banking system has gotten so much bigger than a banking system needs to be to foster capitalism. And it's so monumentally large that at some point we're going to hit a speed bump and the whole cart's going to tip over.
Well, doesn't that kind of raise the question, if the infrastructure of the financial system has gotten bigger, has the mass of the supposed capital gotten bigger, and how much of that is real? And how much of it is just fluff?
Well, I've written a section on wealth creation, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. For years, I've been thinking about it, and I said, okay, this year I'm going to write about it. And then I read a book by Robert Gordon. It's a great book on the topic, some articles and stuff. And, wealth creation is not collecting money. Warren Buffett doesn't create any wealth. He accumulates it. And real wealth creation, you make, mine, grow, maybe code. But, so Gordon makes the argument that 1870 to 1940, we had phenomenal and non-repeatable wealth creation. We're never going to do it again, in his opinion. Mm-hmm. He says 1940 to 1970 flat, and 1970 to present has been pretty much awful, if you look at it. With a spike in the decade from 95 to 05 having to do with computers going from sort of Gandalf the Grey to Gandalf the White. And so I look at things, I go through, again, channeling Gordon at some level. Is Amazon a pioneering company? Is it innovative? Is it transformational? And the answer is no. Analog did what Amazon does. And Amazon does it faster, and there's more products, but it was transformational to go from buying flour and stuff out of a barrel at the local store to ordering prefab homes and parts for and appliances and stuff. That was transformational. Mm-hmm. Amazon is just the Sears catalog.
Yeah, and I also suspect that they have a pretty fragile business model when all is said and done, since absolutely every product they sell has to make a separate journey in a truck from some place to another place.
I think Bezos' business model is to first destroy every brick and mortar he can in the system, and then rebuild them himself. So I think their business model is to transition back toward, if not to, a conventional economy again.
Well, I don't know, but it seems to involve a form of cannibalism that is,
Well, that's the other thing. So, for example, Facebook and Google get these huge valuations. The question is why? Well, they scrape data. Mm-hmm. The data they scrape, how valuable is that data? And everyone else says, well, people pay a lot of money to try to sell you, a mattress or whatever is the one I like to use since I bought one. But the fact of the matter is, no matter how much data they scrape, I'm going to buy one mattress. They might get me to buy a Tempur-Pedic. But if I hadn't bought that, I might have gone to a mattress store and bought a Satva in the showroom floor. And there's no wealth creation there. There's a kind of cannibalism there. And I don't think if you look at the data scrapers, they're worth $1 trillion. It's like $1 trillion Craigslist or something. It's not. That's not wealth. It's actually a tax on the system. It's advertising. It's billboards. It's marketing. So they save. There's some efficiency in marketing, but if Facebook went away today, would we miss anything? And I know we wouldn't miss the Facebook pages per se, but then would their data scraping make a damn bit of difference in our world? No, I don't think so.
Well, in the meantime, we're in the process of destroying every small business in America.
Yes.
At just an unbelievable, shocking rate. A lot of people think that means that there will be no one left but the biggest players in retail and other commercial things. But as far as I can see, a lot of those companies are going to be zombie companies themselves. There'll be companies that can't even generate enough revenue to pay back their debt. So I imagine that the big companies are going to be falling too, because really what you got is a falling standard of living and fewer people buying fewer things.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the other thing is, historically, it's been said, at least by people who say things, the growth comes from the small companies, right? So the real growth was when Bill Gates was a 20-year-old kid building Microsoft, and Michael Dell was assembling computers in his dorm room, and these guys were changing the world personally. If you squash the little companies, then you leave growth to the big companies, and they just don't grow well. It's like one of the arguments for what happened after the Black Death and after the Middle Ages was that the peasants got more wealth. We didn't flourish just because they got more money, more gold, whatever. We flourished because they must have somehow per capita produced more. That's the way you flourish.
Well, there were fewer peasants to do the work, and peasant labor became more dear.
but it also meant that they became entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
And they became able to work. And so who's going to generate wealth? A king with tons of peasants at the end of a whip, basically?
Yeah.
Or a bunch of peasants left to their own devices to get clever? The answer is the peasants every time.
Our other sponsor is Dave McIlvaney's ICA Wealth Management. Don't be spooked by the recent smackdown of gold and silver below $1,800. In fact, Dave McIlvaney predicted it in his previous podcast, and it's actually an opportunity to buy in the face of epic uncertainty. There are two proven and effective strategies for compounding ounces in your precious metals portfolio without putting more money in. But there's only one company you'll find that has been advising clients in these strategies. And
all right. Nothing happening in the chat today, but I would say I'm going to post to Twitter, actually. I'm going to post a poll. Let's see. I'll put it on the screen where you can see it. And here we are. Is this the poll? Yes. Ask a question. Is the C in Bitcoin capitalized? No, I don't think so. Let's let it run for, come on, 2 days. All right. Which would you choose? 1 ounce of physical gold or 1 Bitcoin? Alrighty, let's go back here. Think I'm zoomed in enough? Let's see. Mm-mm. All right, let's get back to it.
Doing so for over 30 years. McAlvany ICA advises you on and manages your precious metals holdings and will not let you get started in dead-end products. Instead, your personal advisor will make sure your portfolio is set up for free ounce accumulation strategies as the markets change and keep you informed on when to make a move. This can also be easily done within your IRA. Call 1-800-525-9556 for a free report to learn more, or go to icagoldcompany.com to download the PDF. By the way, I'm also a big fan of David McAlvany's podcast, the McAlvany Weekly Commentary, which is truly among the best on the web and gives you a great snapshot of David's generous personality. And now back to the podcast. What do you make of all this chatter about the so-called Great Reset? Klaus Schwab and his band of merry globalists.
Well, can you tell me what it is? Because I've spent a lot of time trying to understand what it is, and what it seems to be is a bunch of platitudes that are scary. Klaus Schwab, I expect him to Sieg Heil on me, any minute. And then
he's
you got
like Dr. Strangelove.
Lagarde with her big purse talking about stuff, and I can't. It's just platitudes right now, but it's scary. The word reset alone should scare the bejesus out of you, right?
Yeah.
And I was supposed to do a Zoom call with Steve Hanke, who's a global currency expert, and he said he and a political junkie were going to lay out for me what the big reset meant.
Uh-huh.
I got this funny feeling that it was going to be something really different.
Well, one thing is it probably or appears to involve replacing the dollar as the global reserve currency with some other thing.
Yeah, I think that's probably the core.
But who knows what that really means? And I mean, I think the global economy is unwinding at a rather shocking rate that is going to leave people kind of breathless when they realize how much of it has fallen apart. And I'm
the
not
other thing we're going to run into is something that'll bring back ghosts of past. For you, is I think peak oil was put off, but it's not gone.
Well, oil production in America has gone down over 2 million barrels a day since early 2020. And the forecast, I've seen two forecasts that predict that the oil production will go down to between 6 and 7 million barrels a day. And that's exactly half of what we were producing a year ago. And, this is essentially, our economy is not an economy of moving money around necessarily. It's really an energy economy when you really sweep away the bullshit. And we're going to be operating with half the energy that we had before. So that ought to tell us something about where this is headed. It
is hard to be a global leader energy negative, right? The other thing is you look through history over the millennia, the leaps and bounds were made by harnessing better energy, starting out with, quest for fire, right? They finally figured out how to control fire. Boom, civilization took off. Then, they figured charcoal in the Bronze Age came in, and then they figured out, the Chinese were pumping natural gas out of the ground to run their salt works 2,000 years ago. And then we go through, eras where we burnt peat, and then all of a sudden it's coal, and then all of a sudden it's oil, and then natural gas, and then what's the next one? Well, the next one's nukes, but somehow we've also decided nukes are not it. We may also not have the capital that we expected to have or need to have in order to rebuild the nuclear fleet. Right. But the fact that we've passed on nukes and we're heading for the decidedly inefficient alternatives, like biomass, which I think is a complete fraud. Yeah. Solar, which I've got friends who are into solar. And the problem is, I say, look, is it, energy cost effective now? Was that EROI, I think it is. And they always say, oh, yeah, but I don't think they know how to do the calculation right down to the last niblet of energy required to create the system. Yeah, and I don't think they appreciate the fact that if you subtract the fossil fuel platform that it's that it's sitting on, it doesn't exist anymore. Right, and so we are going to, and it certainly is not energy dense, right? By any stretch of the imagination, it's not energy dense. And grids are unstable with these kind of intermittent energies, and not just that you don't get the energy when you want it because the sun's not shining, but the grid itself is unstable, as you know. And that could be fixed in theory, I guess, but solar's not going to produce the density, and all those solar panels are toxic waste dumps, and there's just the alternative energy. We are deciding as a society, because of fear of global warming, that we are going to do a serious step down in energy. And anyone who knows the relationship of energy to economics knows that the two correlate. And that if a strong economy has a strong energy consumption.
Yeah, and if you subtract X amount of energy, you're subtracting X amount of a standard of living.
That's right, absolutely. And so, was it the long emergency? How many years ago did you write that? That was
15 years ago.
Yeah, and then we fracked and we said, Jim's wrong, Matt, what's his name? Matt, that guy.
Seven-arm?
Guy did Saudi Arabia.
Twilight in the Desert.
Yeah, Twilight in the Desert. The orb is finite, right? So peak energy has to occur. Peak oil has to occur. They pushed it back with fracking, but we know that the fracking industry...
Well, it's happening now. I mean, we are now way below that second magnificent stunt of a peak that we reached in 2018 of, just under 13 million barrels a year. And that was quite an accomplishment, but it was really an artifact of the zero interest rate regime. And they spent 10 years proving they couldn't make any money, and now they can't get new money to continue their operations. So
essentially it was subsidized by the inflation.
Yeah. Now, I want to ask you about something else. In December, a big bunch of mortgage, rent, and loan obligations are due to come out of forbearance. The policy that allowed people to put off paying their stuff when COVID hit the scene.
Yeah, they didn't get to erase it. They just put it off. So they owe a lot now.
Right, they owe a lot, but they didn't have to pay at the time. If they don't renew the forbearances, a lot of people are going to be evicted. If they do extend the forbearances, a whole bunch of creditors and landlords will be screwed, and they'll be unable to meet their obligations. And they're all part of a great chain of obligations of debt. That doesn't all this non-payment thunder through the system?
We'll come back to that question. Down to the last 15 minutes of the stream, and I'm just going to pop on over to Fresco and just do sort of stream of consciousness drawing. I will in a second. Actually, let's... that. There we go. Nice. All right. So yes, let's save it. And pop on over here to Fresco. A little ribbon of pink or pinkish sort of light gray along the ridge line, and then up into the sky. I can still see some clouds, so I can tell the difference between clouds and sky. It's not black yet. It's close. Oh, I'm ready for some daylight. Bring me some daylight. So, it could be that this little Vermont town is exactly where I'm supposed to be right now. I find that kind of a bummer to think about. Okay, I'll start the podcast again for the how many people are still on the stream here. 3. So, folks, if you want me to talk about something, I'm happy to. Just type at me in the chat. I will run my mouth. Otherwise, let's go back to David Collum and Jim Kunstler.
Well, at some point it has to. What they've been able to do is push it down the road as far as they can, and it's Stein's law moment where you say it's if it can't go on forever, it stops. I hate cliches, but that's one.
At least it's a succinct cliche.
At least it's succinct, yeah. And so at some point we will be caught. And then we'll have the Great Reset maybe, and they will do the forbearance thing again, I think, and then the Fed will be buying mortgage-backed securities that are not worth shit, and they'll put them on their balance sheet, pretend like they're worth a shit. And then it'll keep going until something gets in the way. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what it is, but, for example, people who thought things were going to be normal in 2020 did not exactly see the events coming, did they? Right? Now, they've been able to bridge 2020. This is extraordinary. They have replaced wealth creation with money. And I asked on Twitter one day, it's amazing how stupid some people are and how others get it. I said, if you can replace your salary and your job with just a check from the government, what was it you were doing that was so important?
Yeah. And if the government can just write out checks for anything, why don't they make everybody a millionaire?
Right, but you can't do that with the garbage man. He asked to keep coming, right? There are jobs that you have to do, and therefore that person was doing an important job. But the people who got to sit home and collect checks, and the world did not sort of spin off its axis because they were missing. You could argue that what they were doing was not of great importance either.
Yeah, but Dave, let's get back to this point about you've got all these landlords and creditors holding mortgages. And the landlords can't go on forever not collecting the rents.
I know.
They've got to pay mortgages of their own for their own buildings.
They got commercial mortgage-backed securities that are going to then gut pension systems and gut retirement accounts, and right, they'll start defaulting on those.
But there seems to be some idea that there are no consequences to any of that.
Well, at some point there will be, but I've long since given up thinking that I know when that'll happen.
Sure. Okay.
And, I've been writing for 10 years now about the end is nigh, and it keeps getting nigher, but it's not ending yet. I think it will. 25% of the dollars ever created were created this year. Somehow that seems unsustainable to me.
Hey, Dave, let's remember, though, that in the background of all this supposed, kicking the can down the road, there's a marked deterioration in the viability of the middle class. They're losing really, really badly. They're losing their ability to continue, paying for their stuff, and they can't get new car loans anymore. They're losing their houses. They don't have work.
Well, the other problem they have is that everything, to the extent that their assets are overpriced to all-time record highs, you bid up bonds high enough, pretty soon you get a 0% return. So, the general rule of thumb is that the return on bonds is the interest rate on the bond, and now it's essentially zero, right? It might as well be. It's certainly negative in terms of inflation adjusted.
Well, and in terms of the time value of money.
Yeah, and so if your bonds are going to return at best zero, at best, then your equities to reach any sort of target you think is rational have got to keep soaring, and they can't. The GDP over the last 10 years has grown probably maybe 30% off the 2009 lows. And the markets track GDP. Why? Because, the markets really reflect the growth in our ability to produce, right? That's what, the dividends are what you get paid to own a productive company, and the GDP and the growth in the market cap is sort of the gains you make by getting better at it. And the GDP has grown about 30%, and the market's up 450%. And that's just stupid.
Dave, what do you make of the recent sharp rise in Bitcoin back to nearly its high of a couple of years back, around 19,000 to 20,000? I think it was 18,000 and change today. Some shills are predicting $350,000 per Bitcoin. What do you make of all that? It seems to be a valueless artifact.
Well, one could argue the dollar is too. I am not a believer in Bitcoin. I know so many smart people who seem to be. I just saw sort of a sign off by Stan Druckenmiller. Boy, that's an endorsement for the Bitcoin community.
Yeah.
I ultimately think that the final backstop to Bitcoin, the thing that will fell it right in its tracks, is when someone says, sorry, Bitcoin's now illegal.
Yeah.
And they will shake their fists at it and say, that's the beauty of Bitcoin, you can't make it illegal. But if law-abiding citizens say, I'm done, I'm out of here, then you got a bunch of guys trading Bitcoin. and so it's not going to be a reserve currency. They talk about a digital reserve currency, and there's this talk like somehow a digital reserve currency is the same as Bitcoin. It is not at all the same as Bitcoin. That's a bad joke. Yeah. The sovereigns will never, ever give up control of the currency. And what the Bitcoin guys most bet on is that they have control of the currency.
Yeah.
So the big reset's not going to go to Bitcoin.
Not until Casper the Friendly Ghost is the head of the Federal Reserve, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the Bitcoin guys are going to get put out by statute at some point.
I want to ask you a couple of wrap-up questions just before we end this. Just as a kind of overview, how do you assess the Trump years?
Turbulent. I would say that if you strip away his personality and you look at what he's done and you look at what he was up against, I think it's actually been rather extraordinary, and this is not, this is not a warm spot in my heart for the guy. Although I like the disruptor part. I did like the fact that he set up yours to the system. But I would say that there's a guy named Doug Murray who was sitting at a table one day, and everyone was chatting about the evils of the world, and they got to Doug, and they said, Doug, you're awfully quiet. He's this very articulate guy, and he says, well, I think you're all out of your minds. And they said, why? And he said, because clearly the existential threat the United States faces is China. And you all have said that the only president who's ever tried to take on China must be eliminated.
Yeah.
He said he's the only one. And then you look at, he's the only president who hasn't started a major war. He killed a guy somewhere. So what? We do that all the time. Khashoggi died. So what? His peace deals look good. He overplays the stock market shit. I wish he'd stop that.
Yeah.
He just talked about the stock market like it was the end all be all whatever, and that's just stupid. That's just him trying to get reelected. But he's been up against forces of evil in ways that is, Jimmy Carter said, I've never seen the media treat a president so badly.
Yeah.
And so,
in the event that Joe Biden gets sworn in, are you going to miss the failed prosecution of Russiagate perps?
Yes. And but you said that's not necessarily going away. But
yeah, I don't think it's necessarily going away. It's looking pretty grim right now, but who knows what's going to happen with it.
Well, it's hard to imagine with those guys in power that somehow a prosecutor is going to get to keep going.
Yeah.
Unless they come up with something fast.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of treasonous people out there. I think that maybe they've always been there, but I think there's some that should be doing life sentences, probably including Comey and Brennan and the big guys. I had an FBI agent tell me one day that the rank and file thought the high command should go to prison.
Oh, dear.
And so I think there's some very, very, very bad people out there who have done things that we would hang you from the neck in any other era for being treasonous against the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not about whether Trump's president or not. It's about the fact that they're treasonous. They're subverting the system.
Yeah, they've destroyed institutions.
At the very DNA level of our country, they've destroyed it. And so I'd like to see them hang from the neck until dead. That's what I think. And I would like election rigging to become punishable by death. And watch how many people are willing to sit there and fill out ballots then. Boy, you working in that election room, your sphincter muscles would be tightening up pretty tight. That was the case. But I'm really terrified of the elections being so corrupted now.
Yeah.
That they're never going to be believable. I'm terrified that right now civil unrest is protected by geography. So the left is in the urban centers, and the right would say the violent.
Pause that. See what Ed has to say. Could we talk about something? I'm just arriving here. Hello. We went out to Best Buy and Staples to shop for a new device for Jadzia. Her Surface Pro is glitching, and she wants a new device for her final semester at CEGEP. I have a major question about the USA petrodollar. I don't know that there's anybody here to answer your question, Ed. Dryland Fish is the only other person to participate in the chat. I think he's long gone. So I've just pretty much been sitting here by myself today. So, thus, listening to the Kunstler cast. But these guys are talking crazy stuff. You know, I hadn't checked in with Jim in months, and I haven't talked to him since, I don't know, the spring, like before I went to Puerto Rico. Other than, little emails here and there. But I didn't know that he thought that Trump really won the election and that it's been stolen from him. So that's an interesting revelation today. Gosh, what else? That's the big one, I guess. So Jadzia's Surface Pro, which Surface Pro was that? Was it the first generation of them? Because I'm using a Surface Pro 5, and I love it. My question... Oh. Why did the chat just move? There's nothing new here. Interesting. Well, anyway, Ed, I'm out of here in about 3 minutes, unless you can get me on something really juicy. So, what do you got? Lay your cards on the table, mister. What is it you got? If USA Navy pulls back from policing world's waters, yeah. That's an intriguing start. All right, let's close this. Go on. What's next? Will that make demand for USA dollar go down? I suppose, yeah. Yeah, so your original question involved the petrodollar, and I guess that's pretty key. I'm told that China and Russia are already buying and selling oil using a different currency. Let's see, you say partly because it is backed by power of USA military and willingness of USA government to use it. But if the USA retreats to being a regional power, does that cause USA ability to print money to disappear? Yeah, that is a good question. Does the USA need to maintain its global military, full spectrum dominance in order to maintain that ability to print money that other people will actually take seriously as money? And then government budget can only rely on taxes and borrowing. Yeah, the USA as it stands cannot support itself on just taxes. Instead of foreign powers buying treasury notes. So, you've described the USA as pulling back to being just a regional power, but and it sounds like you're paraphrasing Zion, Peter Zion. Peter Zion's point is that the USA is not going to be an isolated country, but instead of protecting everybody's commerce, right to engage in shipping, we'll just look out for our buddies. And our buddies are going to be Canada, Mexico, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and maybe Great Britain, depending on, what they decide to do. But that still means, if the U.S. is still committed to ensuring the safety of shipping for Japan and South Korea and Taiwan, that means that the U.S. Navy still has to control the entirety of the Pacific. and the Pacific is like a third of the planet. So, you can call that a regional power if you want to, and particularly if the UK decides they're going to throw in with the US as well, then the US has to control the Pacific and the Atlantic, and that's basically the world's oceans. But I don't know. I mean, the ultimate answer is I don't know. I don't know what the future holds. I'm pretty sure it's not going to look like the world made by hand. I'm pretty sure it's not going to be the techno-utopia that people like Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg or Sergey Brin or, Tim Cook think is coming. I mean, it exists for them, but it's not going to exist for everybody. But at the same time, information technology is not going away. Big tech companies are not going away. Although, they're so new. I mean, 20 years ago, Microsoft existed 20 years ago, Amazon existed 20 years ago, but they weren't the biggest companies in the world. And, I remember switching to Google while I was at Amazon. Before that, I'd been using Metacrawler as my search engine. As quickly as they've grown, can they go away as quickly, or can they be surpassed by some other new industry as quickly? I don't know. What would that industry be? I just don't know. I have booked a guest for you. What? Let's see. Jadzia wrote a few really good essays this semester, and if you'd like, she'd be happy to discuss them with you via Zoom next Monday. That sounds good. Have her send me the essays sooner rather than later. Yeah, that'd be fun. How about if it's the two of you on together? Or do you want her to be center stage? I mean, center stage for all of 4 or 5 people who will be following live and, 15 to 20 who will watch it later. Yeah, let me put that on the board right now. Hold on. So I got to figure out how to spell Jadzia. All right, Jadzia. Cool. We can both be on at the same time. She'll be at her mom's place in the Laurentians. Right on. Sounds good. All right. Yeah, I'll definitely have the calls. Now, what date is next Monday? Might have to set up the new Zoom call for the new year. Well, Ed, it is 5:04. You popped in here just at the very end, so I am going to shut down the stream, but I'm glad you showed up here at the end. I hope you'll be back tomorrow.